Mōrena kia koutou katoa, kua tai mai nei I tēnei ata. Welcome to the second meeting of the Environment and Climate Committee for this triennium. I'd like to invite Councillor.
Manoa mai te mauri nuku, manoa mai te mauri rangi. He manoa nui, he manoa tahi, he manoa ora e ka whakamaua ki a Tina. Hau e tai ki e.
Thank you, Gabriel. We move now to just note that we have two community presentations to start this meeting very soon. Does that happen first, or we do apologies first? Yeah, so that's coming very soon. Hold your breath. Apologies first. I understand we have apologies from Darren Ponter and Penny Gaylor, councillors, and we have apologies for lateness from Councillor Staples and Councillor Connolly. I'd like to move those apologies be accepted. Would someone second that, please? Councillor Free. All those in favour? Aye. Declare that carried. Thank you very much. No councillor online attendance at the moment, but we'll keep an eye out in case anyone appears. Second item on the agenda is conflict of interest declarations. Would anyone like to declare anything? I see none. So moving on to the third item, which begins with our two community presentations. We have two today, one from Jill Visser, I think, from the Queen Elizabeth Park, and a second one from James Wilcox from Predator Free Wellington. Do we have an order? Jill is up first. Would Jill and team like to come forward and tell us about what's going on in our beautiful Kapiti Regional Park of Queen Elizabeth? And it looks like we have our two rangers from the area who are going to introduce and speak as well. So over to you, staff. Thank you.
The presentation. Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Kia ora, I'm John, one of the park rangers that work at QEP that work alongside Jordan here. And today we've got Jill, who's going to talk through the amazing mahi that our volunteers do within the park. So she's going to give a brief history and then what they do within the park, and I guess some of the environmental outcomes that we've experienced in the park. Last year, they did 2,500 hours in the park. Now, if we contracted that out to contractors, that equates to about 150 k's worth of mahi. But what's not measurable and to capture is the spirit and the vitality that they bring into the park and that community. So we've got a whole bunch of people that do amazing stuff within the park. They're our eyes and ears within the park. They keep us challenged and focused sometimes. So they're an invaluable asset within the park, and I'll hand it over to Jill, who's going to tell us about what they do within the park.
Kia ora, John. Kia ora tātou. So Ian and I are here to represent the three main volunteer groups working at your nursery in Queen Elizabeth Park. And as much as I can in 10 minutes, I'd like to tell you about the really inspiring and invaluable work that is carried out there. Now, is this working? How do I click to the next one? Is it on? That's a really good question.
Does it look like it?
No. Thank you. Nope. Cool, thank you very much. Okay, so the next slide is, so the Greater Wellington Nursery in Queen Elizabeth Park, as most of you will know, is at the southern end of what was once a really large swamp, dune and forest ecosystem stretching from Paikakariki to the Manawatu River. So this area was renowned for its abundant life and mahinga kai. QEP is a small part of that, which is now being restored. Is this working? Yes. So the Queen Elizabeth Park Restoration Group is the first group I want to talk about. That was established over 20 years ago by Greater Wellington staff. They meet weekly to carry out an extensive range of restoration projects across substantial areas of the park. The group is coordinated by Penny Burton Bell and Russell Bell, and they're both highly regarded for their dedication and expertise, which significantly contributes to the group's accomplishments. This slide here is of the Streams Group, which they've been active for over 10 years under Glenda Robb, and they meet weekly and they have planted extensively along the streams and drains in the park. So by increasing the stream shade and food sources, their work has improved the habitat for fish, birds, lizards, weta, and other native species. The Kapiti Repo Restoration Group, coordinated by myself and Irena Katzberg, we meet monthly on a Saturday so that working people have an opportunity to contribute. Because of the significant role that wetlands play in sequestering carbon, we work in a historic peatland area. Approximately half of this group are from the Kapiti coast and the rest are from Poneke, Wellington. And we've been going for about 4 years. The numbers of each of these groups can vary on any given day, from about 10 to 20. Last year, sorry, I'm just getting ahead of myself with the slides. There we go. There are our lovely volunteers. Last year, as John said, the total volunteer hours across the groups was about 2,500. Other groups operate in the parks as well. Maclean's Trust carry out restoration activities to the north of the park, and the Corrections Community Work Team have removed fences and planted and controlled blackberry, among other things. There are also intermittent corporate planning days that have involved groups like Contact Energy, New Zealand Airways and others. Okay, so what is it that we actually do when we're there? So this slide here is showing the shade house in one of the bays. In 2015, so that's over 10 years ago, 5,000 plants were planted by community groups. In last year's planting season, we planted 14,000. Our focus is on enrichment plants, to enrich the areas planted with pioneers years ago by GW. So pioneers are short-lived and they start the restoration process, but they need enrichment plants to provide more diverse, self-regenerating, permanent and valuable habitats. We often receive pioneer plants from GW, which allows us to fill in gaps or begin restoration in areas that haven't yet been planted. Weed control is a constant. Qualified volunteers use herbicide sprays and pastes to deal with the ever-present blackberry and some pampas, and we hand-release young plants. The Saturday group has successfully used large tarpaulins instead of spray for preparing planting sites. We use Hessian sacks as well as weed mats once the plants are in. We've also used fadges of sheep dags to provide warmth and fertiliser, and they work brilliantly. There is also a volunteer trapping team. Here is Michael Stace. Trapping has been continuous at QEP since 2008. And Michael, who's pictured here, has been there from the beginning, and he leads a team of 4 volunteers who manage 270 traps. And in that time, a total of 10,500 pests have been eradicated from the park. So, as well as improving the habitats, the overall picture is a really strong focus for the groups, creating ecological connections of healthy streams and dunes, forests and swamps, both within the park and from QEP to protected environments outside the park, is a major long-term goal. Much of the length of the park has been planted with tōtara at 5 metre spacing, and connections from this corridor have been planted to connect Whareroa Farm and the Mataihuka Escarpment, with the hope that in the future other corridors will connect with the likes of Perkins Farm, Paikakariki Escarpment and Mount Wainui. So this increased area and the increased connectedness will give all of our taonga species a greater chance of survival, especially in the changing climate. A recent success is the self-introduction of matata, the fern bird. This was first heard in the northern wetland in June of 23. These birds have now spread throughout the park. As we know, reintroducing a population is expensive and time-consuming, but by restoring habitat and trapping, these at-risk birds have self-introduced for free. There are 5 Mātuku bittern monitoring sites. They've been set up for the annual bittern muster. So bittern, as you'll know, are in steady decline, and QEP's wetlands could offer hope for their survival in the Kapiti region. Otherwise, we may be the last generation to know them. Bird count sites have been established across the park, and the central 4 sites have been audited monthly since 2015. 10 years of data is now being assessed and will identify the species seen and the trends. There is also 10 years of data on fish and weta. But perhaps the biggest news from QEP since grazing licences were stopped is the re-wetting just a few weeks ago of 16 hectares of historic peatlands in the centre of the park. This has been the culmination of 4 years of volunteer-initiated action and brought to fruition by GW. 5 drains are now blocked, with fish passage enabled, and soon, once it rains, 4 large wetlands will exist. This re-wetted peat will stop around 400 tonnes of CO2 being released into the atmosphere annually. Greater Wellington plans to re-wet a further 13 hectares of wetlands next year. So, as you'll see, this is a landscape scale change in the park, and once re-wetted, these wetlands can recover fast. Anticipating this wetland restoration, we have been eco-sourcing and propagating wetland species, mainly carex and juncus, and special baths have been created in the nursery to house them. So just a little bit more about the volunteers. I'm involved in 2 of the 3 groups there, and these groups have such a diverse range of backgrounds and skills. Russell Bell is a long-time environmental advocate. Penny Burton-Bell is an expert in native plants and managing the nursery. Wallace Ray is an award-winning weed scientist. But our members include all sorts of people, retirees, professionals, students and newcomers, all highly motivated to contribute. This is an important community to be part of, and it offers tangible opportunities to anyone wanting to meaningfully address the climate and biodiversity challenges of our time. The efforts of volunteers have been enhanced by the 2 rangers, John and Jordan, and the relationship is highly constructive. Input from the volunteer groups is actively sought, and we are kept informed about GW decisions. This collaboration means that all parties are aligned and operating efficiently and cohesively. GW also supports volunteers with practical training, including Grow Safe certificates and, as you can see here, LUV licences. So we're now more independent and efficient. With GW funding, groups also now handle more nursery management tasks, which lessens the load for the rangers. We were asked for our vision for the park. Our vision for the future of QEP is a restored landscape of forest, dunes, streams and wetlands, supporting thriving native species, providing resilient ecosystems, sequestering carbon, sustaining mahinga kai, promoting human well-being from low-impact recreation. So we hope this gives you a sense of the scale and the skills and the passion behind the volunteer work at Queen Elizabeth Park and the importance of the support from Greater Wellington Regional Council. We couldn't do it without you. All our groups are driven by the urgent need to address climate change and biodiversity loss, and every volunteer hour contributed is an investment, not just in the park, but in the wider environment and obviously for future generations. So kia ora, ngā mihi nui.
Thank you very much, Jill and team. You said there that you couldn't do it without Greater Wellington, but I get a strong sense that we couldn't really do the park without the volunteers like your groups. That's an incredibly inspiring way to start our day. My train was on time, my bus waited for my daughter, and now this presentation. This is going to be a good day. I'm going to buy a lotto ticket. However, I've jinxed it now. And councillors, what questions would you like to ask? Here is Councillor Wolf with a question about Fernbird and Patterne, no doubt.
I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just going to say thank you. You guys allowed me to fulfil a bucket list. That area there that we see on the screen, I managed to photograph dab chick chicks on the backs of their adults, and it's an absolute highlight for the area. It's drawing photographers from all around New Zealand, to that area specifically, but also the Kapiti coast. And the corridor that we have now is so special. Ranging from Makara, it's 82 kilometres right up to Otaki. We've got a lot of work to do, and you guys are absolutely phenomenal in what you're achieving. So a big, huge thank you, not just from our councillor, but from a photographer who knows that other photographers appreciate what you're doing as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, and I will accept that on behalf of everybody who puts in amazing effort in the park. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Free.
Yeah, thank you. It's encouraging to hear about all the great work. I just had a question. Is it possible to explain very simply why the wetlands reduce the carbon emissions?
Yes, because historically they were underwater. All of that carbon in the form of the plants that fall into that wetland, the carbon, if it wasn't wet, if they weren't wetlands, the carbon would rot. It would rot and be released into the atmosphere. Because the water is covering it, the CO2 isn't released. But so that is why peatlands and wetlands are fabulous for sequestering carbon. Once they're dried out, then all of that carbon just releases into the atmosphere. And I heard a stat which I couldn't believe, which is that about between 5 to 9% of all the CO2 that is currently in the atmosphere is from wetlands that have been drained. So if just wetting them is a huge gain.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Saw, and then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you so much. I just want to, tautoko what Councillor Duthie said of this is such a great start to the day for our committee. So thank you so much for your commitment and passion for the area. I was just wanting to know, how could we make it easier for you? What are some of the things that at council level that would help your work? And my second question is, are there a sufficient number of volunteers coming through, and who's on your wish list of people to be joining your groups?
Are there, well, the second part of your question, first of all, or your second question there, are there enough volunteers coming through? We are a fairly aged group. In fact, Jill here is part of our youth wing. We have people who are even in their 80s, but highly active in their early 80s in the group. And I guess it's inevitable that it is retired people who have discretionary time who form the bulk of those who work with us. Not sure. When I'm working in the park, I see all the people cycling through and thinking, maybe every 100th person who cycled through could perhaps put in a few hours and join a group. That would be great. But we do pretty well with, usually about 15 in our group, up to 20 on a good day, and the other groups of similar size. As far as what the regional council does, I mean, we are extremely aware that the regional council is the organisation that is supports and sustains everything that happens in the park. You've appointed 2 outstanding rangers, and in my life as a secondary school teacher, I remember a principal saying once that the most important influence that a principal had over the school was to appoint good staff. And I think regional council, by appointing John and Jordan, have done an outstanding job for Queen Elizabeth Park. The relationships, as Jill said, are really constructive and good communication flows. But I suppose if there was one other thing that I think is great, and that is to have, for volunteers to have a strong sense of the direction that the council wants the park to take, of long term. Sometimes when we're working just at grassroots level, we're unaware of important things which are going on in the background, and having a strong sense of being part of a bigger picture is really useful to us.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is a little bit better communications between sort of the high level, the aspiration, and the work that you're all doing, hands in the soil, and maybe some ideas around recruiting more volunteers. That be not for you, but things to think about.
I think
these aren't big expensive things.
No.
Yeah.
And I absolutely want to acknowledge with John and Jordan, the communication has been phenomenal, and it's feeling like a real partnership in a way that perhaps it hasn't always traditionally been. There's so it's we're all noticing the difference, and it's really, really positive. And in terms of volunteers, we do get a number of, we do get kind of enough volunteers, but there's always room for more. I started the Saturday group, and I got heaps of university students. And there are always new people to bring on board. People are so passionate about working out there and feel so good about themselves and what they do. And there are just heaps of people out there waiting to be found and to come on board. So anything that you can think of to enhance that, brilliant.
Thank you. Councillor Johnstone, and then I'll have the last question. Thank you.
Let's turn it on. Firstly, thank you, and I'm so pleased to see that we're going to get more wetlands developed somewhere. I've got a particular interest in bitterns. The population nationwide is under 2,000 and falling, and I picked up what I think might have been the last bittern out of Pawatahanui run over on the road a couple of years ago. Later euthanised, which made me really angry because the zoo didn't actually know what sort of bird it was, and it was a breeding hen. So anyway, so I have a bit of a thing about them.
Yes.
What's the sort of population that you saw there of the bitterns the last survey? Do you know?
Do you know that?
No.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have those facts and figures. If Penny was here, she'd be able to tell you just off the top of her head. She has all of that stuff at her fingertips. But I know that bitterns have been heard and seen. They've been heard to the north of the park, and they've been seen flying from the north past Ramaroa, but not many at all. So we know that they are approaching. And we know that within the park itself, there is, we've had Wendy, can't remember her surname, she's a wonderful advocate for bitterns. She's come all the way through the park and she has identified really good bittern habitat. So we're just planting up and we know that they'll come.
I hope so, because
Yeah.
we haven't got many left. And
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to ask was actually over the fernbirds. So we introduced fernbirds at Pawatahanui, and I just wondered, is it possible that they've actually come from there? I know they're very secretive little birds. You probably can't answer technical questions, but these are the dumb things that I think about.
We don't know where they've come from, but they have been heard and seen. They absolutely have been heard
So
and
quite
seen
cheeky.
at QEP. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, sorry, the third question I've got is just actually over pest control, because the things that I've been observing in our area are the stoats swimming across the water out to some of our islands where the birds are. And I just wondered, we're around that wetland area, do we need to do more in the pest control area? Because obviously stoats, weasels and everything else are a real risk. Is there more that we would need to do to protect that area?
I think that, I think there's always more to be done. Again, Michael Stace is the king of trapping in QEP. What do you think, John?
I think we have a real focus around the wetlands and around the remnant forest in terms of both from our volunteers, but also too from our pest animals team. But again, Jill makes a valid point that you can always do more within the park. But they are two areas that are actually areas of focus.
They're terrible threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just going back to your bittern question as well, I think one of the things that we're really hopeful and encourage is that the re-wetting will provide a bigger and better habitat for bittern to protect.
Thank you. So just last question from me, and to, I guess, pull it back to our level of governance. We've set a long-term direction for our parks network through Toitu to Whenua, and we understand that there's a master planning process underway in Queen Elizabeth Park, which I assume you're involved in.
Yes.
Is that a process that is assisting in terms of connecting that broader direction for the park with your everyday work on the ground? Is that proving a fertile ground for that connection that you're talking about?
Maybe I'll speak to that. Because we haven't finished the master planning process, I guess it can't really guide until it's finished, but that's something that we will be communicating, and they've had their stakeholder consultations, and then we'll review the document as well. So they're very front of mind and will be taken along on the journey once that document has finished.
Thank you. So the potential's there. Sounds good.
Yes,
Appreciate
absolutely.
you coming in today. Thank you very much for starting off our day with such an inspiring note. And I'll now ask, you're relieved, and I'll ask James Wilcox from Predator Free Wellington and Fanway Hill, I think, Predator Wellington staff, to come forward and perhaps tell us some more good news and inspiring stories. But I won't steal your thunder. Over to you two, Fanway.
Kia ora. Thank you. So for those that don't know me, I am Fanway. I'm the Environment Operations Manager within the delivery team at Greater Wellington, and so I've worked closely with James for a number of years, and more recently in my role, so I look after the Predator Free Wellington team. James is the project director here from Predator Free Wellington, and he just wants to share an update, and I'm assuming that people are aware of the news from yesterday, so fill you in on that also.
Yeah, kia ora everyone. We'll see if we can certainly keep the theme upbeat and positive, and just wanted to ngāmihi the group from QEP. Being a Kapiti Coast local, I have really enjoyed seeing the changes there over the years. I'm looking around the table here and seeing some familiar faces and also some new faces, so I thought I would just start with a very quick wraparound of who it is we are, what we do, and where we're going to next. So for those of you that have viewed this before, then please permit me to get through it or tell me to shuffle on quickly. I'd also just like to make mention of Denise Church. She is one of our directors and the Regional Council appointed director for Predator Free Wellington. So Regional Council is not only a funder but also a shareholder and a service provider. So we have a very fantastic relationship with your organisation. So yes, Predator Free Wellington, we are part of a broader national strategy, the government strategy around becoming predator free in Aotearoa by 2050. And that involves the complete removal of rats, stoats, possums, weasels, and feral cats have just been added to the ledger as well. Our role from the outset was to ascertain whether we could do this in an urban environment. So we're very much around proving a concept, and we've been able to do that, and really the journey has taken us from beyond Miramar into what we're calling phase 2 now. And then as you can see on the slide there, we've got some pretty massive expansion plans. So we are really at our heart a partnership. We are relying on population level behaviour change, and that is a partnership between ourselves, the likes of Greater Wellington Regional Council, Wellington City Council, the airport, philanthropists, and importantly, every single Wellingtonian. Our job is not to be here forever. We come in, we do the elimination piece, and we want to give that back to the community to look after in perpetuity. That is the model we're seeing on Miramar, and it's a model that's working, which is pretty phenomenal. Do I? Thank you so much. So we've been, I guess, a little bit in the wilderness over the last year. So central government company that was set up called PF 2050 Limited, which had a role in funding landscape scale projects like Predator Free Wellington, was disestablished through the budget process last year. And the government of the day has been relatively quiet around Predator Free, really up until yesterday. But as part of a funding announcement for Predator Free Wellington, which I'll get to, they also announced a revised national strategy for Predator Free, which is pretty phenomenal to get the government stepping up, getting in behind this thing that was launched by John Key back in 2016, 2017. So it sends a really, really strong signal. And as part of that, the only funding announcement the Minister made yesterday was for Predator Free Wellington. And so that doesn't answer all of our funding questions. It's a contribution, but more importantly, it is an affirmation of the work we're doing, and I guess an affirmation of the role that urban-based conservation has with a broader Predator-Free 2050 mission. So we think we will see these types of projects being replicated in other urban centres throughout Aotearoa, and an amazing opportunity for us to continue building capability and transferring that knowledge that's required. So right now our team is about halfway through that phase 2. We are sweeping through the suburb of Newtown. We actually have our team in Wellington City Zoo. So Wellington City Zoo is becoming the world's first predator-free zoo, and I guess by that we mean introduced predators, because they've got tigers and things in there. And that provides some very, very unique challenges. Of course, a lot of our tools are targeted for rodents, and things like capybaras are large rodents, so we can't go around killing capybaras or having our staff maimed by tigers. But that is just another day, another set of challenges that we face in this journey. And importantly, it's the City of Wellington and the broader region that is answering the call. Very, very high levels of participation. We need basically 100% of people on board for this. We are putting lethal devices in every school, every park, every home, every business. So it really is a genuine sense around population level behaviour change. The goal with this funding announcement, I guess, which is $5.5 million over 5 years, as I mentioned, it doesn't address all of our concerns. And last time I presented to Regional Council, I was talking about facing a significant funding cliff, which we were sailing off. So this is a team game. This is a great investment from the government, but it is part of the picture. That really means we can supercharge our work through phase 2 and then step into what we're calling phase 3. And that's a pretty massive prize, because that is the CBD of our capital city, right? That involves Parliament, that involves our business district, and it involves a large reserve called Te Kopaho Reserve off the southern end of Zealandia. So effectively, we would be increasing the footprint of Zealandia by 5-fold. We want to go out and start getting permissions. We will need about 5,500 individual permissions for the urban piece within the next 3 months, and then looking into moving into operations in the next calendar year. So pretty exciting times for us, and fantastic to have that endorsement from the Crown to really put our foot to the floor. We are seen as the urban exemplar, and with a view to replicating this throughout other cities in the country, of course. I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of our work, because often we strike this scenario where not just predator-free, but other conservation endeavours are viewed as nice to haves. This is what we fund when times are good, and then we cut them when times aren't so good. So of course we have the ecological benefits, and they tell the stories for themselves. They are the ultimate why for all of those tens of thousands of Wellingtonians that are volunteering, and the tens of thousands that are volunteering throughout the region. But what we've seen on Miramar is pretty remarkable. And some of those indicator species like kōtari, our sacred kingfisher, have increased by 550% in the last few years. That's absolutely phenomenal, and that's just in the absence of introduced predators. Back that up with 200% increase in invertebrates like tree weta and geckos and skinks turning up in people's laundry baskets all over the place. It's a very, very compelling story, and the evidence has stacked up incredibly quickly. We thought it was going to be 10 years before we saw meaningful ecological outcomes, and it's just happened overnight. So it tells us that actually our native species are reasonably resilient in the absence of introduced predators. Beyond that, we've been wanting to do some work in trying to quantify the social outcomes. So we've done some work called Most Significant Change, and that is talking to everyday Wellingtonians around what living in a predator-free city means for them. And so we start to touch on themes like intergenerational change and community leadership, and that adds such a depth of richness to our stories. You know, as humans, we are natural storytellers, and to be able to bring that element into our work is phenomenal. The other piece is around a language that I didn't really want to learn, I must admit. That's cost-benefit analysis and return on investments, but it is a bit of a theme of the day. And what we wanted to do is back up with data intuitively what we already understood, and that is that, you know, for every dollar we spend on predator-free Wellington, we will be generating a level of economic benefit for the city and its people. And so that equation has come out for every dollar we spend, we're generating $2.49 of value. Cost-benefit analysis can be made into anything, right? They can be extrapolated over 10 years. This is a year of expenditure versus a year of benefit. It is a very, very conservative view. We've taken the smallest multiplier, like 0.1% across a number of those numerics. And you can't invent this. We had to draw on Treasury, CBAC's indices, and well-established international research. So my point is that it's incredibly robust. You could get the smartest economist sitting down and rip that to shreds, and it would still stand. Why that's so important for our story is if you're thinking we need 100% engagement of the people of this city to do our work, often it's actually birds are great, but I'm not that interested in them. I want to know how this is saving me money and making my life better. So when you can tell them that 15% of house fires in the US are caused by rats chewing through wires, and they don't have to worry about that anymore, or the international tourism dollar that's coming into Wellington directly associated with predator-free Wellington. We've got a pretty well-trodden path of international researchers coming here to find out what it is we do. So those kind of things really help us change the game. And quite frankly, it's what we need to roll this thing across the country, right? Biodiversity for biodiversity's sake is great, but we need to pair that with social outcomes and economic outcomes to actually get to a point where central government will fund a national rollout of this. And the refocus of the new predator-free strategy is about answering the questions we need to by 2030 with a view to then moving into a national rollout. So it is quite an exciting time. Of course, our work isn't bounded to Wellington City. When you consider being part of a national program, you consider starting in somewhere like Wellington Peninsula and then rolling that further north. And that is indeed what we're entertaining in terms of a national rollout strategy. So Wellington region would be the first region in the country to be enjoying the affluence of predator freedom. Got to start somewhere and keep moving out. We are doing a lot more with the regional volunteer predator-free groups. And that table up there, I think, tells a really, really good story. So last year we ran a regional predator-free workshop in partnership with the Predator-Free New Zealand Trust. And we had 139 attendees from all across the region. And one of the focuses was, I guess, around re-enthusing, re-energizing people to make them know that this predator-free 2050 goal hadn't gone away. But the second day was actually about building capability. And if you consider you've got around 850 volunteer predator-free groups throughout the region, and they're responsible for removing over 50,000 predators from our region, that's pretty substantial. I think around 100,000 traps and 50,000 bait stations. We want to make sure that those are deployed to the best of their abilities. So we had some workshops around data gathering, data management. We had some true legends in the trapping game showing people tips and tricks. And that's designed to be able to say every one of these traps, every one of these bait stations deployed throughout the region is at a certain level. And I think considering that as a picture, that total volunteer effort for the region is really, really incredible. Hundreds of groups out there doing really hard work all around that predator-free philosophy and ensuring that we are ready to step from the city footprint into that broader regional piece is really, really key. Oh, the other thing that we're doing in terms of the regional picture, I guess, is we are responsible for bringing new tools to market. And so you've got one of those up on a photo, but this is essentially a second generation Ranger. So this is a H20 unit developed by a company called Zip. And so one of our primary tools are obviously bait stations with Brotificum. They've managed to get that into a liquid form with a hydrogen cell, some hydrogen cell technology. So that's essentially a paste bait with Brotificum in it. You activate it and it sits there in the bush for 3 to 6 months. So we don't have to put people in to be emptying bait stations or filling bait stations every week or every 2 weeks. That can sit there and do its job for 6 months. We're also in the ledger to be trialling a rodent-specific toxin called nabormide, and that would be the first urban citywide trial of that throughout the country. So we're right at the edge of bringing this new technology to market and then being able to deploy it throughout the region to get greater impact, greater gains for less effort. We have to be thinking about automation as we work to scale this across landscape. So that is another aspect of what we're doing with respect to with the regional picture.
James, just quite keen to leave some time for questions, so if you can move to wrapping up. Thanks.
You know I love talking about this stuff. I just wanted to end on a huge thank you to Regional Council for the ongoing support and partnership, because it is absolutely fundamental to what we do. We couldn't do it without you, so I'll leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Questions for James? We have Councillor, I was going to call him Councillor James, and he is Councillor James.
How serendipitous. Thanks, guys, and thank you for your work. James, you mentioned before that even with the government's funding injection, there is still a funding gap. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I think when I spoke to you last year, that was about 6.75 mil over 5 years, but just interested to see.
Yeah, so I guess this investment from the Crown with $5.5 million over 5 years, so we're not sure exactly when that'll land. I guess that was part of the ministerial announcement, but that plus our current contributions gets us to about 3/4 of the funding we need. But the great thing that we have now is a multi-year commitment from the Crown, and that's something we didn't have previously, and that is a foundation stone to then take to philanthropists, new partners is really, really key. So being able to go and say we've got this small gap that we need help to fill is a very different proposition to, hey, we're sailing over a funding cliff. So my attention after yesterday's announcement immediately turns to our philanthropic partners and seeing if we can get the dial switched there.
Thank you, Councillor Saul.
Thank you for coming in and updating us, James. Always great news. I'm really interested in some of the future challenges. Like we can see that the eradication of pests has a lot of benefits, as you've just mentioned, not just for flora and fauna. But I'm just interested to know what new challenges we have that might not be a predator-free thing. For example, if we have all this teeming bird life, do we have enough urban urban ecosystem to support all this new bird life? Like, what are some of those future things we might be needing to think of?
Learning to live with nature is certainly presents some future challenges, but we're already seeing that now. And I think there's a good example. What was that beautiful glass encasing at the top of the cable car was responsible for a number of kaka hits in Kiruru, but having decals put on that is lessening that. And I think that's a really good challenge to the planners in our city, as well as how we build that into policy, how we build it into design. And we're seeing some really fantastic early wins around that with the cycleway between Petuni and the city, having those developers approach us and talk about how can we design so we're minimising any risks of predators ingressing into this area. So that's quite exciting. And then, of course, with every phase, we have the challenges in the built environment. And, Miramar presented as a massive challenge unto itself. That was solved. Now the zoo is a plan within a plan within a plan. And then, of course, we've got the landfill in phase 3, and that's going to be very, very challenging to get in there and eliminate the target species from that environment. But with every challenge, it's an opportunity because it is a people landscape, you know. So
I guess there's things like, you know, you have a housing shortage for people. Are we going to have a housing shortage for all our native manu that we're, you know, making it easier for them to live? And food shortage.
one of the great things about Wellington City is that our forebears, I guess, retain a number of green spaces. So I think we're at about 30-40% of canopy cover, which is quite phenomenal for a capital city. Something like predator-free Wellington dovetails really nicely with the revegetation program in City Council. So they're planning on planting 2 or 4 million trees, and that's already well underway. So the habitat's coming along. There's certainly opportunities to align work programs, say when you're targeting invasive weeds for removal, then we do the predator removal, and then we get into a revegetation space. So there are opportunities for greater impact by aligning work programs.
Councillor Elder and then Councillor Johnston.
Just a curiosity around the built environment. Are feral cats a problem, and if so, how are they managed?
Feral cat, I guess we're relatively lucky with respect to the fact that feral cats are a very recent addition to the predator-free strategy. They haven't been a huge issue for us in the urban environment. That said, there are or were managed cat colonies on the likes of Miramar Peninsula, and that has been something we've been able to leverage off our partnership with Wellington City Council. So they put in, I won't get the title right, so forgive me, but an animal control officer.
Animal liaison officer.
Animal liaison officer is responsible for removing about 100 feral cats from Miramar and throughout the area, and then housing and rehoming what they can. So it's a great example of us getting together with our partners and trying to deliver some broader outcomes that have been beyond our remit. As we step into the rural landscape, absolutely it's going to have to be a target for us. But nice not to be the first project having to grapple with that.
Yeah, that role's now removed over 700 stray cats from reserves around Wellington. So it's quite transformational.
And I presume as you move into more rural areas, like the south coast, the southwest corner of Wellington, then the feral cat populations might become more of the picture.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Councillor Johnson.
Firstly, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. It's incredible. A couple of things I just wanted to ask about. So Zealandia and the zoo have told me that they are really dependent on tourism from a financial perspective, particularly the cruise liners. If we lost the cruise liners, then actually we would lose that income. I'm really interested in whether we could also, in your opinion, get more money if we put more pressure on READER and on Tourism New Zealand to understand that the conservation benefits that we have in this region and other regions could actually be improved through the work that you do, that may be another funding avenue, because I look at Wellington with its decreasing population. We have to bring more people in, and we've got some huge real assets here that we could be using, but all over New Zealand that could be there. And I just wondered if tourism is stepping up and actually recognising this. Has anyone ever spoken to you about it?
To be fair, tourism sector or READER have been a little bit slow in my opinion. So you're right, we have something happening in our city and our region that's occurring nowhere else in the world. And I personally think it needs to be part of the Wellington re-emergence story. You know, we've had the daylights kicked out of us over the last couple of years, and I think that we are ready to step into a new future, and I think the prevalence, our native abundance should be part of that story. And so we are starting to get a reasonable amount of traction with the likes of READER and tourism, and working with yourselves and regional council, but also city council. We need this to be a story that Wellington owns, Wellington feels incredibly proud of, and we haven't been able to push forward with the momentum we've needed to given our funding challenges. And so with those listening, now we can really put our foot to the floor. But you're absolutely right. Not only strengthening it from the tourism sector, but as our identity, I think, is really, really key. The fact that we have international researchers turning up here absolutely gobsmacked by what it is we're achieving is pretty cool.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to end by thanking you, James and Denise, for inviting me to speak on behalf of the council at your Hui workshop late last year. it was a really wonderful space to be in, with so many of groups like the Queen Elizabeth Park we heard earlier, those sorts of people doing the work on the ground, all gathering together, learning off each other. And I have seen tangible results from that since in my patch in Lower Hutt, of groups that are upskilled since that, learning how to add blaze and lure and things to their traps to attract, make them more effective and so on. So that's been very positive. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. I think it's time for us to move on to the remainder of our agenda now.
John, thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the confirmation of the public minutes of this committee from the 26th of February. Councillors, are there any questions or issues with those minutes? I don't see any. So can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved Councillor Saw, seconded Councillor James to accept or approve, or whatever we do with those minutes. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Rōpū Taiao Strategic Framework. And just in case there's any confusion, Rōpū Taiao and Environment Group are interchangeable terms for the same division of Greater Wellington's work. So I will hand to Leanne to introduce this paper and staff.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, councillors. We're just going to be talking to you briefly about the Rōpū Taiao Strategic Framework, so I'm just going to open, and then I'm going to hand over to Fatima and Anita. So Fatima is our Director for Strategy, Policy and Regulation, and Anita is our Manager for Strategy and Planning, and they will be able to answer any of your questions. So why are you seeing this here? Basically, in your terms of reference, as you all know, I'm sure very, very well, one of the jobs of this committee is to overview environmental strategies, policies and plans, and that's to oversee the development, implementation and delivery of those plans. So that's why we're just bringing it to you today. Also, it will form the basis of how we present information to you ready for LTP conversations. So we wanted to kind of give you a bit of a look underneath the hood in terms of how we plan in the environment group and how we'll be presenting our information to you through that business planning approach. So, why do we have one? Firstly start, how does it fit with the long-term plan? So the LTP remains the primary mechanism for council to set strategic direction. So very much so, this strategic framework sits underneath that LTP strategic direction, and it helps us to translate that direction into consistent advice and delivery. And why was it needed? So 4 or 5 years ago, the Environment Group did not have any strategy. We had when we went through the change process, we worked out we had around 110 strategies, policies and plans, and our Kamahi were trying to deliver on all of those plans and policies. There was no cohesive way to bring it all together. This was creating a whole bunch of issues such as the Whaitua process, where we were agreeing to do things with mana whenua and communities in terms of how we would deliver on the ground, but we had no mechanism in which to take those recommendations and put them into our business planning and programs. So the issue with that is we weren't delivering what we said we would do, and it was one of the major issues that the change process was set to identify and find a solution to. So the team have been working through all of those strategies, policies and plans to make a cohesive sense of those, to put them into one framework that we can develop all of our business plans and programs to. Now, I know that it takes a resource, and it's really important for the environment space for us to deliver outcomes on the ground. And we often hear we just want more boots on the ground and we want to do more stuff out there. One of the issues was for our kamahi in operations, for example, was while we have the kamahi there to do it, they want to know, where are we doing it? What do you want us to do? Who do you want us to do it with? And what outcomes are we trying to achieve? So this is what this does. We call it the strategy to delivery planning system. We take our outcomes in the long term right down to what is this delivery team doing on the ground today. We now have a simple view of what we are stewarding and the priorities we are working towards. It shows the long-term environmental legacy based on the work we are doing today. It is a common view to test trade-offs, prioritise efforts and align advice to you, delivery and reporting. It provides clarity of direction to our people and programs, and we are able now to provide better and more connected advice. It also provides a framework, which we'll be talking to you over this triennium, about how to improve and measure the impact and effectiveness of what we're doing and the difference it's making. We have been using it for the 26-27 annual planning. We used it to test our savings proposals, to think about how they impacted on long-term results on the ground. So finally, this shows you what we do under our hood, how we plan, how we business plan, how we bring advice to you, and it will be used to shape our approach to the LTP. Our corporate team have developed a GW strategic framework, which we'll be seeing as part of the LTP workshop to guide the LTP, and this includes the outcomes from this strategic framework. An environment group, as I said, will be framing our LTP around the outcomes and objectives in this framework and the services that are needed to deliver on those objectives. So I just wanted to kind of highlight why we're bringing it to you today. Now I'll close off, but the team here, if you've got any questions for them. Thank you.
Anything to add, Fatima and Anita? Okay, so questions from councillors. Councillor Elder.
Can we just clarify, is this an agreed and already signed off strategic framework, or is it draft proposed yet to be debated by the council?
So just to note that this is a strategic framework that is used for very internal purposes only within the environment group. It's based on plans and strategies that have been to the council and have been agreed by the public as well. So it was just a place for us to collate that all and make sure that the direction that our environment work is heading is in a nice place for us to actually measure our outcomes, deliver on our outcomes as well. So therefore, we have brought it to council previously. We brought it in the past triennium to the council, but it is primarily an internal framework to help shape our work.
Councillor Saul.
How might we see this framework inform or come to us as reporting? I'm thinking a useful way might be a state of the environment report, like to, you have a framework, you have a work plan, how we're monitoring and reporting against it. So could we see something that would result in a state of environment report, say, particularly looking at those 3-year objectives and, those are very specific things that seem measurable, that seem that budgets are attached to them. So, and they are outcome focused. So is there a way that we can see some reporting that could also have greater benefits, as in what's happening to our environment and what is the impact of our work?
That is absolutely our intent. Don't know what's going on there. I'll sit further away. You're right, we deliberately designed most of those 3-year objectives so they are measurable. What we are now able to do, now that we have this full framework, is to build that performance and accountability framework that will allow us to give you, to strengthen that reporting that we give you, and also to use to underpin the advice that we give you, so that that is coming backed by what we're achieving and where we're trying to get to. That framework is still in development, so it is a little way off, but it will be grounded against this approach.
Councillor Saw, do you have a follow-up question? Your face suggests you do.
No.
Any other questions from councillors? No? Yes, Councillor Free and then Councillor Makarini.
Well, obviously I'm quite new to all of this, but I did think there's an awful lot of objectives for 3 years, and I also found them a little bit repetitive. So I am wondering if we could possibly, if this is still draft, if they could be maybe prioritised and maybe reduced in number. And there is a little bit of repetition. For example, I see that we're going to invest in mana-led initiatives in a couple of places. Mana whenua-led initiatives. So it's just a bit of feedback from me, but I thought it was rather a lot.
You're absolutely right. It is a lot, and what we tried to do was to actually, as our initial set of objectives, cover all of the breadth of the work that the group does. So this actually gives you a really good picture of the variety of things we're trying to achieve. And through this LTP process, what we'll be doing is looking at exactly where is the focus that we need across those 3-year objectives. But we did want our people to be able to see right now where their work is and how that aligns strategically. So we are very aware of that point and looking at how we can provide some more focus through the LTP process.
Through the chair, I could just add something to that, Councillor Free. Yes, it is a lot of objectives. I think when you go through 110 strategies, policies and plans, you find out you've agreed to a lot of things. So there is a lot of objectives there. We have a very fulsome work programme, and there may appear to be double ups. It's probably more because a lot of our work is interconnected. And so because it's the environment, that work is also overlapping with that work. I think that's why we have so many, but it is really important that all of our things that we've agreed to do with you and with our communities is reflected in our strategic objectives. But the conversation with you, with the LTP, as Anita said, will be about where do you want to focus, what are the biggest risks that you want to make sure are well resourced and those kind of things. So it will be useful and we'll be able to prioritise effort using them.
Councillor Makarini. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any further questions, so I appreciate that paper. It's for information only, and we are duly updated and informed. Next item is item 6 on the agenda, changes to Resource Management National Direction. And I think we have Matt Hickman and Michelle Collins joining us. It's always exciting when the law changes and we have to then pivot to think, what does this mean for what we do day by day? And there's perhaps less in this paper than the words might belie, but let's hear from the advisors.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. Continuing the inspirational theme, we'll be talking about the Resource Management Act. So this is a footnoting paper, and it talks about the changes to the national direction under the current Resource Management Act. So this is very much possibly the last change that we will see before that act is repealed. Now, figure 1 in the paper discusses how the system all fits together currently. And attachment 1 sets out specific instruments with a commentary on the implications for Greater Wellington. So there's no specific decisions in this report for you, but we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from councillors? I'm not surprised if there aren't too many, because in terms of what could be the implications from a resource management law change, this is relatively minor in the scheme of things. And things like changes to the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, which could have been part of this but are not yet come through, that will be more substantive. There you go. I bought you some time. I filibustered.
Thank you. Actually, that
you
was the question I had, is that it has been signalled that this is coming. Do we have any crystal ball gazing of when that we might have some indication of what this that new NPSFM will be landing?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair. From what we're hearing at the moment, it's potentially unlikely we will see that this side of the resource management system. It'll probably be bundled with the national direction that sits within the new system, because we've been promised exposure drafts in months and exposure drafts, but they haven't appeared. So it's more than likely now that it will roll into the new system, particularly given the time lags it takes with plan changes, etc. And we do have a plan stop at the moment nationally, so it makes it difficult to implement as well.
Okay, so we're in a bit of a no man's land of we've sort of paused where we were going with the work that we've done over 13 odd years, and just hanging and waiting until the new direction comes.
Correct. Great. So we've done a lot of work. We're waiting to see how any of that can be transferred into the new system. So we're in the minefield at the moment, right in the middle.
Yeah, and so I guess it's part of our plans and regulations are operative and other parts aren't. Is that correct?
Well, we have plan change 1, yes, which is paused. Now, that is there, that has been notified, so it sits there, so that is
Yes.
in force, in effect. There's also a variation, there's also RPS change as well. So all that's there and in force. There are no new plan changes currently planned, which would then change our system further.
I want a little bit of clarification around the duration of consent extension, which is sort of paragraphs 15 to 18, page 26 on diligent. Just to understand the interaction between the extension to 2031. Like I read it over and over again and I still didn't quite get it of how everything interacts with each other, especially because we've got the wastewater standards coming as well. There'll be consents that need to be processed, that are being new consents that are being processed, others that have come to the end of life. Can you just explain to me the interaction between all these things and what is the what is the needle we're trying to thread as the regulator and Captain Planeteers of the region?
Thank you, through the chair. So the current situation is all of the consents that had recently expired that were allowed to continue operating under their expired consents under Section 124. They've all been extended to December next year. And those ones that have just expired, same thing. Ones that were about to expire have all been extended. In the Natural Environment Bill, it talked about further extensions. So that's where that 2031 date comes from, which is why it's not clear.
So any of the already expired ones that are still allowed to continue as expired consents may be extended to 31? Is that...
Yes.
So does that mean they operate under whatever conditions historically existed at the time of the previous consent, not whatever the new regime may be? That's just sort of what I was trying to get around.
That's correct. So they're not actually operating under those expired consents. They've actually been reinstated, so they've become live consents again.
But operating to a different set of rules that if you had one that was going, you'd be under a different set? Sorry, I'm just really not...
That's okay. So all of the oldish consents, which were about to expire or had recently expired, they have been reinstated, so they've been brought back to life.
Yep.
So they now expire December 2027. New consents, so if you need to apply for a new consent, they're not subject to this. So if you have a new consent, you can still have a term of consent of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, etc. So they're not captured by this. So this just relates to those consents that were either recently expired or about to expire.
Thank you, Captain Planeteer Saw. Question from Captain Planeteer Makarini.
Kia ora. Thank you for this. It's again a kind of a clarification. So given that we're kind of sitting in that no man's land, I just wanted to confirm that essentially we are kind of continuing, otherwise, unless otherwise stipulated, that we're kind of continuing with our practice as it has been. So particularly around, our noting the impacts of the new legislation and reforms, particularly on our partnerships and implications for Māori and stuff like that. Are we continuing to maintain our partnerships and our obligations in the same way?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair. Yes, so effectively it kind of freezes our current approach. So through the planning framework, through all the partnership arrangements we have, whether it's pre or post settled, and the arrangements and agreements we have with pre and post settlement entities, that all carries on now. And when we see what the new system's looking like, part of navigating that new system is working out how our approach to partnership will work, given the new regulatory settings, which are challenging, as we've discussed with the submission. But for the time being, it's business as usual, and we carry on as usual with those partnership arrangements and agreements and conversations.
Thank you. Sorry, just to step outside that a little bit. Is that the same case with our other modes of operation and partnerships, and not just with Māori? I'm asking. Is that just standard? We're just kind of continuing.
Yeah, and you would have heard from the conversations we've had this morning, all that sort of operational stuff carries on. The resource management framework is still there and those conversations happen. There's no kind of notifications in terms of plan changes and hearings and that side of things at the moment because plan change 1 is paused. But everything kind of carries on until we know what the new system looks like and we have to pivot to that new system. But there is a transitional period and we're currently doing some work on what that looks like and how we can work within the two frameworks.
Thank you, everyone. Councillor Rhodes, question?
Where do you think we're going with the identification of natural hazards and retiring land subject to hazards and things from development? Because, you know, the history of New Zealand has always been building on land that's got a hazard like flooding or something or other, but, you know, raising ground levels so it's flood free or setback from cliffs and things like that. There's always an engineering response or something or other that can overcome a hazard. And we're still finding hazards, you know, is emerging all the time there. So where do you think we're sort of going in that thing there where we're identifying the hazards, but we've got an engineering response to mitigate them?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair. I'll comment in terms of the planning framework and the national direction as per the paper. So there's a new MPS for natural hazards. We have a risk-based framework within the regional policy statement and natural resources plan as well. That's consistent with that new MPS for natural hazards. So what we're seeing is a more risk-based approach to hazards and hazard planning, and that will work through the system as we understand the science, the impacts, the climate, and then working out what our response is to that. So I'd say we're aligned with where government has gone. It's all risk-based. It's then working out what's next, particularly when you bring in spatial planning, and then that overlay of spatial planning in the context of hazards, in the context of climate change, that's all for us to explore within the new system.
Does that suggest that you know, the government's been trucking along with streamlining resource management practices and consents and things like that to make them simpler and that sort of thing? But that sounds contrary to where we're going with that, because to identify hazards and identify the risks means more resource consent analysis and reporting and everything like that. Do you think it'll get more complex rather than simplified?
I think, through the Chair, if you think about the cost over the longer period, it's probably better to do that work in the short term, make sure that people aren't in the way or industries aren't in the way, and then the public and the taxpayer aren't paying that cost of what happens then.
Thank you, everyone. So I think that was a for information paper. I can't see any more hands. The next few papers are some of the areas we carrying on. The wastewater keeps flowing. The compliance, monitoring and enforcement keeps happening. And Whaitua keeps being implemented as it can. So thank you, staff, for that paper. The next paper is item 7, municipal wastewater discharges and the new wastewater environmental performance standards. Fatima is going to introduce this as the Director of Strategy, Policy and Regulation. I did give her initial feedback that it would have been nice to have more colour photos in this report to illustrate the topic. She rejected that idea. However, over to you, Fatima.
Kia ora, committee. I just thought maybe just giving you a little bit of context about the basis for this advice around wastewater municipal discharges and the new wastewater environmental performance standards. So just to be clear, this is advice that we're providing you as the regulator, as the environmental regulator, and bringing that into your governance role in the environmental regulatory perspective. You have multiple roles in the wastewater, water, bulk water space, working at GW, working as our governors. So this is just making sure that the frame that we're bringing this in is in your governance role as the environmental regulator. I'll now hand over to the team and invite them to introduce themselves as well.
Kia ora koutou. Sean Andrew Author, so I'm the Manager for Environmental Regulation. On my right I have...
Michelle Conland, Lead Consenting Advisor.
Morena koutou, I'm Stephen Thorley, a project leader in environmental regulation.
So, Michelle is our SME on all things wastewater. So pick her brains. And Stephen's our project lead who leads out our compliance program. So you've got the experts in the room. What we thought, it's a very technical in nature paper. We'll let the paper speak to the detail, but what we thought we'd do is just run through a quick PowerPoint because just to bring out some of those key messages from the paper. We thought that'd be helpful in terms of highlighting sort of at a higher level what the key points are. But like I said, the paper will speak to the detail and we'll take that as read. So I'll have to just flip to the next. Oh, we got the clicker. So yeah, so what we'll run through a bit about what the standards are, but what the paper does, it sort of talks about the standards. It gives a comparison of the current performance against the standards. So which plants will have to up the game, which ones may even have to go down in terms of the standards. We've done a little bit on the compliance history of the plants as well, because I know that's been requested by this committee in the past. So we thought we'd give a bit of analysis there. And a summary of some of those compliance issues. So I'll pass over to Michelle now to talk through the standards.
Thank you. So there's different categories of standards. These relate to end-of-pipe discharges from wastewater treatment plants, the reuse of biosolids, wastewater overflows, and bypasses. Of all of those, the bypass standard is the most lenient when you compare that with the current requirements of our regional plan. For the wastewater treatment plant discharges, you see in attachment 2, it's not necessarily that the standards are too lenient nor too stringent, they're just not necessarily tailored to the plants and in particular the receiving environments of those plants. Some plants could potentially treat the wastewater to a lesser degree, while others will need to upgrade infrastructure to be able to meet the wastewater standards. One thing to note is that the standards only take effect when applying for a new consent. The first plans likely to be affected over the next few years are Lake Ferry, Seaview, Castle Point and Tainui. Also potentially if Martinborough goes to a new land disposal area, that will also be regulated under the standards.
Apologies for interrupting. I just wonder if, for councillors' sake, is this a correct statement that up until recently, Greater Wellington has been the regulator of wastewater in its network and treatment plants, and we do that through our natural resources plan and consents that follow under that, and that is directed by the National Policy Statement on Freshwater and other objectives like that. The new thing that came about last year was central government putting out national standards for elements of the wastewater network that effectively sit on top of or displace or next to our usual consenting process. And so the focus of this presentation is to help us as a committee understand how these new national standards have come into our existing way of regulating wastewater and what that means over time. Is that a reasonable summary, just to draw the connection between our usual and past practice of consenting these things and the new national intervention around standards?
Yes, that's right, and we've got a slide coming up which highlights that as well.
So I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions coming, so continue and then we'll have questions at the end.
So these regulations, they set out what conditions can and must be included, and that is through that resource consent process under the RMA. So just to go a bit further, the standards sort of sit over top of, but also beside the RMA and our plans, our natural resources plan.
if the standards are unable to be met at the time of granting, then the treatment plants have 5 years to meet those standards. So this is the diagram that I was referring to. So if you look on the left-hand side, this is the current standard RMA process that a wastewater treatment plant and those similar activities would go through when seeking new resource consent. With the new wastewater standards, elements set by the standards, and that's on the right hand side, those two brown boxes in particular, and the standards set particular limits for total suspended solids or total nitrogen, enterococci or E. coli, and also have very prescriptive requirements for wastewater overflows, bypasses, and then other matters which are not set out in the standards for wastewater treatment plants in particular, other contaminants such as heavy metals, PFAS, other contaminants like that. Also flow monitoring and the discharges of odour, they go through the more usual resource consent process. Conditions are put on those consents in relation to those matters, which are assessed and included through the consent process. Whereas the standards on the right hand side, those brown boxes, there are specific conditions set under the standards that need to be included on that resource consent.
Could we hold to the end, Councillor Saw, or is it on this slide?
This one's related to, yeah. So if I understand it correctly, like wastewater comes as like this one thing, right? It's like this one substance. And if I'm understanding this correctly, the rules that we're going to have are going to separate out different parts of it. So you're going to have the Taumata Arawai wastewater standards for particular contaminants and indicators, and that brown box in the middle, and then the green box is going to look at the other things.
That's correct. That's right.
And okay, cool. Thanks.
Old Star, Councillor Saw, you're correct. Continue.
We might move on to the next slide if there's no questions on that. So this is just some pictures of some of the treatment plants, just to give you an idea. For example, there's the Pororo wastewater treatment plant outfall on the left. The top middle one is the Seaview bypass to Waipatu Stream. There are two bypasses, two main bypasses in the Wellington city area, and Seaview to the Waipatu Stream would be one of them. There's the Martinborough oxidation ponds. From those oxidation ponds, it goes to a discharge to land. So if you have a look in attachment 2, some of the treatment plants have a discharge to water aspect as well as a discharge to land. That's called a mixed discharge standard under the wastewater standards. Likewise, in the middle there at the bottom is the Lake Ferry land disposal area. So again, Lake Ferry has a mixed system where some of the discharge goes to land, some of the discharge goes through a constructed wetland, and then to a very short length of river before it goes to Lake Inoki. And I won't go into all the detail here necessarily, but this just has some of the implications for our region's wastewater treatment plants. These plants here are all of the ones on this side of the Rimatakas. Some of them may meet the standards, and then others may not. In attachment 2, it talks about the expiry dates. For example, Pororo City Council, the Pororo wastewater treatment plant is unlikely to meet the standard due to particularly its nitrogen levels. However, that consent won't expire for another, I think it's about 15 or 16 years. So they've got a little bit of time to put in place some actions to be able to meet those standards. Other treatment plants like Seaview, for example, their consent expires within the next 5 years or so. So they have to do a little bit of quicker work in order to be able to meet the standards potentially. Just click on to the next one. And this is the Wairarapa wastewater treatment plants. This is a little bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, there's quite a few treatment plants for South Wairarapa, so that will be quite challenging there. And we might just move on to the next one. And I'll pass over to Stephen Thorley, who will talk about the current compliance.
So just to pivot in terms of the compliance monitoring and enforcement space, this is just a snapshot summary for a 3-year period of the performance of wastewater treatment plants in the region. And it just really, we have a rating system that ranges from very good is a very high bar, essentially means full compliance with all suites of conditions of resource consent. And as you can imagine, these wastewater treatment plants are dealing with wastewater on a daily basis and often have daily measurement requirements or even greater than that in terms of, say, for example, measuring flow and so on. So it is a high bar in terms of getting into that green space. Certainly, as you can see, 2/3 of our plants are in that fair to poor space. And I've just given an outline of just some of the types of examples of what it means when we're saying fair and poor. We're probably more talking about environmental effect-based conditions or repeated management-based conditions that are not being met. With good plants, there may be some missing monitoring data points or late reporting and so on. So that just gives a brief overview of a snapshot of the CME. And obviously the paper itself entails much more specific information relating to not only the performance but also the response that we've had in terms of action. And as we do follow our CME policy, where we have the 4 E's in play: engagement, education, enabling, and also enforcement. And so there are various responses that we are doing in that space in response to the compliance status of each plant.
Stephen, we have a question on the slide from Council Staples.
Thank you. Just on that slide, would it be fair to, I'll go back a step, things have changed a lot in the wastewater area from, you know, the 50s where they put in some settling ponds and then let the poo off into the river, or the semi-treated outflow. So are we in that position because a lot of the plant that we have is old, running on sort of older consents, and standards have changed and it's taking time to get up there? Or are we in that position simply because, I don't know, it wasn't on the list of important things to do for many councils, or is it a bit of both?
On my initial comments, there'll be a multitude of reasons as to why some have ended up in, say, fair or poor. It might be through what was accepted through a consenting process, a notified process. It can be a lot of negotiation either at a hearing or through the court process in terms of coming to agreement on conditions. Some of those conditions might have been a bit more aspirational in some respects and say targets of what we really want to get there, and let's put it in as a condition. And so, but that can have a perverse outcome too. So there's one example of where you know, how these conditions come about and then how those assessments are made. But Sean or Michelle might want to add to that further.
Yeah, I think it's really a point. I think what we've seen over time is the goalposts have changed. You think about the MPS for freshwater, for instance, that came in, and that got reflected through our plan. So that upped the game in terms of those environmental performance the plants had to reach, the bar. And so through each consenting process, they may be under a different framework, and then they get consent granted for a certain period of time under the framework at the time. So that framework, the bar has risen. And then you have got aging infrastructure. And we're not talking about a few dollars here and there to fix this infrastructure. We're talking millions sometimes. So it's that sort of perfect storm at the moment of the bar's increased in terms of environmental performance. You've got aging infrastructure, and it's not cheap to fix. And especially you think about communities such as the Wairarapa, you've got small communities, South Wairarapa, for instance, where you know perfectly well, Councillor Staples, it's got I think 5 plants that it's got to maintain with a small community. So that's the sort of thing we're seeing through the regulatory impacts and through the compliance programs.
Councillor Free, question on this slide too.
So I'm trying to get my head around some of this. So that looks like a pretty grim picture to me of how much is needed, and I'm just wondering what is our obligation as governors to get this information out there, because I don't really understand what we're meant to be doing with this information. And I take it it's still our role as a regional council to do the regulatory stuff, even with GRQI, and to uphold all these new, to be monitoring these new standards and counting all these new variables. So I think this is probably a question for the CE. I mean, what are we meant to be doing with this information?
There you go. You've been summoned.
Yeah,
CE.
yeah. Thank you.
That's a good segue, Council. Yeah, look, this information is firstly for information. So this is something that the previous councils have asked for, and we've committed to come back to, looking at a good alignment of where our planning documents align with what Te Mata Arawai is putting in place through national regulations, and how the wastewater treatment plants in our region stack up both with what's currently in play and what will be in play. So first purpose is information flow. Our role as regulator absolutely remains. So we are the regulator, and we will be the regulator into the future as well. So what we need to do to ensure compliance with wastewater treatment plants across the region will not change. We remain the regulator. We will have national guidance through Te Mata Arawai in terms of national standards. That will have to be reflected in the regulatory roles we have, and we are trying to line that up, as this paper is doing, with what is in the current suite of consents that we have and city and district councils have in terms of their wastewater treatment plants. When Te Akiwai comes on board, they will inherit all the consenting framework that is currently in play with the current City Council consents currently managed under the Wellington Water regime for those entities that are part of Wellington Water. Again, our regulatory role remains exactly the same. So the purpose of this paper is very much for information and education. It is clearly a public paper, so you can use any parts of this any way you want. Fatima and I went and met with Te Mata Arawai CEO and senior staff yesterday. They had an advanced copy of this paper. They're aware that it's in front of you today. They thought that was an excellent thing to have in front of the council, and we will continue to engage with Te Mata Arawai into the future as well, as they start to develop national standards, and we'll be very, very closely aligned with them as to how we implement them into our consenting framework, how it relates to the wastewater treatment plants in the future, and how we keep coming back to council. So kind of a long-winded answer, because it's a very good question, and I'm happy to keep talking, as will the team, if we've got other questions around this. Fatima, did you want to add anything else based on our meeting yesterday in particular?
I'm just trying to maybe address Councillor Free's question around, what can you do based on this information? We're presenting this information in your governance role as a regulator, but you have questions from the community asking about their potential wastewater treatment plant, the fact that it is performing poorly. The owners of the operating treatment plants, particularly before July 1st, are the councils, the city councils. So in terms of the performance and getting up to compliance, it's the responsibility of the city council and the operator to do that. What we do is regulate to the consent conditions that have been issued as part of the consent. So it's just making sure that you're supported in that role, in the ability to comment. It's not our role to fix the issues that are there in each of the wastewater treatment plants.
Supplementary, Councillor.
Yeah, look, I just want to make the point that this isn't information we should just sit on. It's like it is somebody else's responsibility to make sure the plants are compliant. But if we know things, I'm reassured that we are in fact sharing this information. My other question was about the nitrogen levels, because I noticed that we don't seem to be able to determine whether a plant's likely to meet its total nitrogen whatever discharges. And I'm wondering why. Why is it that we can't seem to measure? I noticed regularly it either wasn't compliant or it couldn't be determined. What are we doing about making sure we know what's happening with nitrogen?
It's not that we're not measuring nitrogen, it's just that the type of nitrogen that is measured under these consents is not necessarily the same type as what is included in the standards. For example, the standards include total nitrogen, whereas a lot of our consents split up nitrogen into its component parts. So it might be ammonium nitrogen or just the other types of nitrogen. The other thing is that the discharge to land standards in particular talk about or refer to the number of kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, and not all of our consents seek that information. We seek other information which makes sure that the loading rate of nitrogen is appropriate so that it doesn't get into groundwater and that sort of thing. So it's not that we don't have that information, it's just that we have been receiving it in a different way from what the standards. So over the next few years, as these treatment plants come up for needing new resource consent, they will need to gather that information so that they can provide it in a consent application for us.
Thank you. I have a supplementary question on Councillor Free's earlier question. Am I right, staff, that nothing in this report about compliance record of plants will be new news to the owners of those plants? This is for the Wellington water plants. This is reported on a regular basis to the Wellington Water Committee, and to other plants. They are well aware of where plants are compliant or not compliant. So there should no councillor of any territorial authority should be unaware of this situation that is painted in this report as it pertains to their territory. Is that a fair comment? See, Nigel?
Yes, that's a fair comment. Furthermore, in addition to sending this report to Te Aki Wai prior to Te Mataara prior to it coming to you, I also sent it to all the CEOs of the region and Te Aki Wai. So a completely transparent process aimed specifically, A, to have no surprises, but B, this is public record information that we have collated in a context that is, I think, useful for everyone, because you can see the nature of what's happening across the entire region.
We've got a bit of an order now, so we better just revert to it. So Councillor Saw, then Councillor Connolly, then Councillor Johnstone, and then we'll come back to you, Councillor Free. Who would have thought wastewater would be such a hot topic this morning? Here you go. Councillor Saw.
Is this a time to do the barrage of questions? Is this the time now, or Chair? Great. So my first question is, being relatively new to the regulatory governance space, have there been such a situation where we have our responsibilities under the RMA, like going back to that table we had where I was like, same substance, two different sets of rules. Have we ever had this occasion before, and how have we approached it?
One instance where we've had this occasion is we've had national standards for water metering, and those standards have specified water metering requirements for taking water, say for irrigation, and sometimes those standards were over here and our consent conditions were over here, and those so yes, we have had to juggle differing national based standards and consent condition standards on other types of activities.
Do you think that that approach would be helpful to sort of knit the two together? And at that time, given that you've had that experience of doing that, is that going to be useful for us to do this as best as we can, because my next question is, I guess fundamentally these regulations and these standards are essentially to improve, to not further degrade our environmental state. Would that be why we have them?
It's a very leading question. Look, I think our analysis shows that that some of the plants will have to upgrade and up their game to meet the standards. There are others that may be able to downgrade in certain parameters. So, in terms of that environmental question, will it be an improvement? I think our analysis shows it's a mixed bag. So I think one of the things we highlighted through our submission to the standards was that with wastewater, it's very receiving environment determining. So the way we deal with our consent process is a very case by case receiving environment specific. What the standards are trying to do is do a one size fits all for all those receiving environments, and that's very difficult. So that's why you've got this bit of a mixed bag coming through our analysis.
So then, am I understanding it correctly that there will still be aspects of the same substance that will be subject to its impact on the receiving environment, and others that is just end of pipe?
No, so
No.
the standards are all end of pipe.
Yeah,
So-
but then you know, in that box there's still the aspects that are under the RMA as we know it now.
In relation to those standards in the box, we cannot include other conditions which would affect those standards. So we can't say, for example, the end of pipe E. coli standard is this, but then also have a receiving environment standard for E. coli, because potentially that would affect that national standard that we have to include. So we're not allowed to sort of do a sneaky kind of backdoor thing where you...
But what I mean, because the standards don't include all the potential contaminants in the substance, what about the contaminants that aren't under the wastewater standards?
The same thing still applies. We just have to be careful that whatever we do in relation to those other standards doesn't affect the E. coli and the standards that are listed.
But say if you had, for example, if you had PFAS coming through at one point that you were monitoring, that would impact, that's something that is under the RMA, and that would be where you'd consider the receiving environment. So you can only, but then what can you potentially regulate or CME if the contaminant also has the E. coli in it? It's the same. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it's going to be
challenging.
It's going to be challenging. It's complex. I think the way I see it coming through is when we get those renewal processes, we're going to get consent conditions which almost cut and paste for the standards. So you'll have a cut and paste end of pipe standards. They're from, because that's what we have to do. And then for everything else that was in that sort of green box on the previous diagram, you will have a whole raft of consent conditions pretty akin to how we do it now, and that will be probably end of pipe receiving environment type conditions. So you'll have almost like a set of conditions for the standards, they're set, and then the other things, there will be a whole set of conditions around as well.
So I had a question around the Mahina Kai paragraph 22 on page 41, which determines that it's a 4 kilometre sort of, I guess, radius from point of discharge. Is that sufficient? Like, given that all the different receiving environments, like, is just a distance an appropriate way to be able to keep those areas of collection safe?
That's been set by the standards. That's not for us to determine.
No, yeah, but I'm just... okay.
That's what's been specified by the Tamatara Way. So,
Great.
Yeah, we've raised that through our submissions. This is where this has been landed. It's not us to debate around that.
No,
Yeah.
sorry, I might have not framed
No,
the
no,
question properly, but I was like, okay.
yeah, it's what we've been told to do.
Yeah.
Councillor Saw, can we move to some other questions and then come back to you? Just to.
I did ask if this was my time to ask all my.
You've had a good view. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Connolly's been waiting very patiently, and then we'll come back to you.
I have two questions also, but I wondered if I may comment on Councillor Free's question from the perspective of our Wellington Water representative.
You may.
So, yes, regular updates come to Wellington Water and indeed come between Wellington Water meetings on the status of our treatment plants, and generally the ones in this side of the Rimatakas, 4 out of 5 are always non-compliant, and it kind of shifts around as to which one is compliant. I guess the other thing is that the conversation, so people are very aware of that, and if anyone is interested in receiving those updates, I can ask Wellington Water to include you all on that distribution list. I guess the other thing, though, is that the conversation around the table often isn't from the TAs, isn't how can we, they're very concerned that when we do action our regulatory function, either through fines or prosecutions, that just makes their challenges harder in terms of meeting their obligations to provide good quality wastewater treatment, because they're already facing massive costs in terms of renewing their wastewater treatment plants, and then we hit them on top of that. So they would argue that our function does not make their lives easier, and it doesn't incentivise their action. I've just put that out there. You can challenge them on that, not me. My two questions are firstly around the overflow. I'm particularly concerned about this, particularly for Waiwhatu, and I note that there have been various scandals in the UK in particular around wastewater treatment plants regularly using overflows because their standards are weaker than the standard for the substantive discharge. And I just wonder, surely we've raised this with with Taumata Arawai, and surely, have they acknowledged that as a risk, and are they going to look at it? And my second question is completely different, and perhaps someone from Tohunga Whiriwhiri wants to take this. I did not understand attachment 3 at all, so I'm wondering if someone could explain that to me. Surely our treaty, treaty settlements do not include attribute tables in them. I didn't understand what this means, and whilst we've got obligations to provide healthy water bodies, surely it's not at the level that this paper kind of suggests it is.
So take those in turn.
The terminology for the Waiwhatu is a bypass, just to clarify, because there are also overflows which are dealt with slightly differently. Yes, we're also concerned about the regulations for the bypasses. When the draft standards came out, that was one of our key concerns, and that was highlighted quite strongly in our submission to Taumata Arawai. I also spoke to Taumata Arawai about that particular situation. I suspect they think that by saying that bypasses have to be temporary and for emergency purposes, that may have solved the issue. But I'll continue to engage with Taumata Arawai about our concerns. The bypass regulations, they don't come in until 2028. So at the moment, we're kind of in this sort of no man's land a little bit. We're hoping that there may be some amendments that could be made to the regulations in relation to bypasses prior to 2028.
Thank you. And the second question relating to Appendix 3.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora, Councillor Connolly. The intention with attachment 3 was to include the tiriti responsibilities for each plant, which would be relevant for reconsenting of those plants. You're absolutely right. Those processes that are required through settlements otherwise don't go down into the level of attribute tables, but they will put process requirements on Greater Wellington in that process. The caveat to that is that those processes, whether that's iwi management plans or statutory acknowledgement requirements or the natural resources plan for the Wairarapa Moana Statutory Board once those is developed. And once that's developed, they will put process requirements on it, but the effect of the standards is that those cannot shape the parameters that are included in those attribute tables.
Just to follow up, so in the treaty settlements, they have given mana to various other processes like mana whenua environmental plans.
Correct.
And through that, they have outlined their aspirations for various water standards, but also processes that we should deliver on. But what is the status of those documents now that these standards have come into place?
The regulatory impact statement for the standards that was developed by Taumata Arawai said that the intent wasn't to undermine those redress elements. In practice, they prevent those particular mechanisms from influencing or shaping the parameters that are in the standards. So it is like other changes through proposed changes through resource management, it would have a reduced impact of an influence of those relationships and statutory documents.
An additional comment from Fatima on that.
Yeah, just to also respond to that question in addition to what Carl said, those aspirations and statements are in our plans and we give effect to them through the consenting processes. These standards go on top of all of that. We have to now implement these and there's no sort of room for consideration. However, I think it's a valid point that has come up quite a few times for us in terms of the acknowledgement, particularly to our communities and our mana whenua, that has happened through a regulatory process that has been publicly consulted on. And with these standards coming on top, that basically stops that process from happening. So we were trying to look at other examples where regional councils may have had to consider this through a consenting process, and there isn't any. So once the standards come through, there is the ability for people to test this through the court process for where the aspirations of our community and mana whenua line up with how these standards are coming through the consent process. So that hasn't been tested through yet, but I'm assuming as New Zealand puts this into place, it will probably be tested through the court process.
Councillor Johnstone, and then back to Councillor Free and Councillor Saw.
That suits very well because I'll go back to Councillor Free's original comments. So I'm just thinking about those results, and I'm wondering if rather than taking a passive approach of saying yes, we have that information and it's available and we sent to councillors, whether we should actually be more proactive in letting our public know the state of the nation. And the reason I say that is if you read the media in the last 24 hours, people are failing to understand that we're going to have to pay to have the ideal water situation and water infrastructure. And while I recognise that transparency can be very difficult and very challenging and make it harder, I've always found that when people understand things, then they're less likely to argue. So I wish to ask the officers, is it possible for us to be a little more proactive, provide those diagrams, get it to the media, but also explain that in releasing this, the money still has to come from somewhere. And I'm not trying to open up the Three Waters debate. I'm trying to say let's be a little bit more proactive on what the problem is. And I know we can't solve the problem; it's somebody else's problem. But we need to be a little bit more upfront. Is that possible?
Can I just make an initial response to that? In that, I think the answer is yes. It's always possible to be more proactive. There's probably an element of it comes to us as politicians and governors, and the chair of the council and the chair of this committee and so on, rather than officers themselves. That would be. So it could be a conversation that we carry on as politicians as to how we go about doing that in a way that is respectful of our regulatory role and its limitations, its constraints. However, that's my thought, not officers' advice. So any additional advice from officers on that particular question before we move to another question?
a couple of comments from me, and I might pass it on to the team as well. But a lot of this data is already out there. So if you think about the paper, there's two elements to it. There's the an analysis against the standards, that's one part, and then there's the compliance of existing plants, that's the other part. That information on compliance is already out there. It's in the public domain. Wellington Water publish it, all of their information on their website, and that's where a lot of this data has come from. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the absence of our chair, our deputy chair would like to add to the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just taking a slightly different look at it as the regulator, as our staff have pointed out, the information is public. If we were a regulator of how fast other council staff members drove, and we gave them tickets for how fast they drove, it wouldn't be up to us to tell the public that the council staff were driving, other council staff were driving too fast. It would be up to the owner and operator of the infrastructure. So I think we need to be a wee bit careful as the regulator. This information has been shared with us as the regulator, and I have absolutely no problem in councillors talking about it, sharing it. But I think if we start to look like we're lording it over the owners and operators of this infrastructure, we're going to walk back into that situation where they say we're a bunch of horrible people because we're trying to tell the whole region what to do, which is when I first became involved in regional council, how our TA colleagues thought of us. So I just think we need to be very careful how we tread while we share this information, and we are definitely, it's a requirement of us to be onto it and to share it, but I don't think it's our role to actually look as if we're trying to beat the owners of the infrastructure up. Just my thoughts. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Frienthal.
I just still feel a little bit uncomfortable because the plant I'm most familiar with is a Mole Point plant. I live in Strathmore Park. And we can't give an answer as to whether the nitrogen levels are going to be okay under the new regime. And I just wonder why not. And I know I didn't really understand the answer I got. And I also wonder, are we expecting self-reporting from treatment plants, or do we actually go out and take samples and measure? Because I do think I'd like to understand more about our responsibilities in this regulatory environment, and I've heard what other people have had to say about the limit of our responsibility, but we do have a responsibility, and I'd like to understand more about how the monitoring is actually done.
So please comment in response. If there's anything technical and highly detailed, we can always follow up with some written advice, but add what you'd like.
Why can't we measure the nitrogen levels right now, and how difficult would it be? And are we expecting the plants to actually report to us, or do we send our staff out with samples and chemicals and what goodness knows what to actually form an assessment of whether there's a breach or non-breach?
I'll start off with a general comment on that. Look, ultimately it's for the plants to demonstrate compliance with the standards. So when their application comes in for renewal, we'll expect a detailed analysis from them. It's called assessment of environmental effects, and they will have to do an assessment against all of those standards. So we will get a report from the applicant in terms of how they will meet those standards. That's what we'll get. So what we're highlighting here to those applicants now is that if you're not monitoring for this sort of thing, you need to go and start doing it now. Because when these standards kick in, we will expect this data to come into us. So it's not our role to go and then start monitoring for those standards. Our role is to check compliance against the existing conditions of consent that apply at the moment. But what we're highlighting to the applicants here is that your existing conditions may not marry up with the standards in the way we analyse that. So you now may have to change your monitoring to then, when you're applying for your renewal, to be able to show whether you meet or don't meet the standards. This is our initial assessment on whether we think they will or won't, but that will come out through the application process for the renewal. I don't know if you want to add any detail to that, Michelle, but that's...
Yeah, let's leave it at that. Thank you. So just coming back to Councillor Saw for a final word question. So can we? No. No.
As a council, do we actually go out and do spot checks? Do we do our own checks on how compliant things are?
The vast majority of monitoring that is reported to us, for example, around wastewater quality, is self-reporting and undertaken by the consent holders. And that is the case actually largely across a lot of our CME program. That happens with water monitoring as well. We get water meter data and so on. If we have concerns about that data and that information provided, yes, we do have the ability to go and potentially measure ourselves. If we have concerns about the information or the accuracy of that data, it is very infrequent that we will do that, but we do have the ability to do that if we felt like the data was compromised in any form.
Thank you.
And we respond to complaints as well and investigate those. So Councillor Saw, last question on this, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Cool. Maybe my questions are all for more taumata arawai than ourselves, but I was just thinking back to when we were doing the last term, when we were looking at all the target attribute states and the rather alarming grades of some of our urban waterways in terms of being receiving environments for some of these contaminants. Bearing in mind that was from a whole lot of other activities and not just wastewater. I was just wanting to understand generally what impact will these standards for the bypass and overflows have on some of our lowest graded waterways, where, as also a regulator, we have aspirations to lift those D and downgraded receiving environments. What might we see there with these standards coming in place around those bypass and overflows standards?
So thankfully the overflow standards do require improvement, and it requires a plan to be put in place to make improvements, so reduce volume, reduce frequency. Our regional plan, Plan Change 1, is much more specific about how that reduction occurs. So there's a little bit of uncertainty about exactly what the standards would require, potentially what is the minimum that these water entities could do and still comply with the standards. So yes, as I said, our Plan Change 1 was certainly much more specific about getting some of those improvements and the reduction in the volume and frequency. In terms of the bypasses, that's a different situation that we've mentioned before, which mostly affects Waiwha 2 stream.
So, for example, if you've got a receiving environment that's currently, our monitoring suggests it's at D, and it's still the the discharge that's coming out is to the standard, do we know what impact it will have on that rating of that receiving environment?
Well, interestingly, the changes to the RMA and what's proposed in the Natural Environment Bill expects the other discharges in that catchment to do the heavy lifting, basically, to be able to meet those target attribute states. So there's requirements that essentially, potentially, you may not be able to grant consents for other discharges in that catchment. And if you're if you've got an existing consent and you go to replace that consent with a new one on expiry, you may not be able to get that new consent based on what is currently worded in the Natural Environment Bill.
I think that's noted in the report, in the paper, isn't it? Where, if I understand this correctly, it's like the receiving environment has to allow for the wastewater standards, so everything else has to kind of fit in to allow whatever that contaminant load is, and then that might have an implication with the requirement where we have to compensate? Yeah, the regulatory relief. So is that where we might get, if someone can't get that consent to do the thing that they're doing, or the standard is much more stringent, we may be liable, or is it a TA that's liable for regulatory relief to enable the wastewater to do its thing under these standards? Is that right?
Yeah, potentially there is an interaction there, but obviously that's in the Natural Environment Bill, and we don't know whether that will remain when the final version.
And that goes back to the point that the wastewater standards are end of pipe, and that's it. There's no regard to the receiving environment, so it's just end of pipe standard.
And then just one other question, and this is my last question. We were talking about how some of the smaller sites have to consider an annual average population. How does that work if, say, for example, I'm just supposing that Riversdale is a holiday site, and if you have those like population fluctuations seasonally, how does that work for those sorts of situations?
It's also based on carbonaceous BOD5. So if it's less than 85 kilograms per year, I think it is, then they also classify as being a small plant. So that's designed to take into those seasonal variations. Yeah. So it's not just population based.
Thank you very much. Some home truths in your final questions there, Councillor Saw, that will vex us, I think, for the next few years on this topic, if not the next few decades. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and staff for all your informative answers. That's been a very useful paper to have before us. We don't often get to talk about regulatory matters and to see them as an original big picture perspective, so that's been very useful. Moving on to item 8, talking of regulatory matters. This is a decision paper. Yes, good to highlight that. And relates to annual reporting on environmental regulation that happens across the regional sector, and a suggestion that we have some additional reporting brought to us. So appreciate this coming forward as a paper, and let's hear from staff about it. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. We'll take the report as read. What we are seeking with this decision is essentially an agreement to the current level of regulatory reporting that be maintained, and we've outlined in our paper around that level of reporting, which was also presented at induction in late 2025. We've also suggested that there be some additional reporting that comes through that accompanies the CME metrics report, which is included as part of the paper, as to how councils across the board are doing in that CME space across the regional sector, to provide some more greater Wellington context around our CME program and what we have been doing on an annual basis. So we're seeking that we'll do that additional reporting as part of the CME metrics report.
Thank you. Questions from councillors? Councillor Saw, leading us out the gate again.
I'm sorry. This is actually really interesting. I'm sorry. A couple of questions. The top highlight was the just over $3 million that was collected in fines. I was really curious to know, was there a collation of the cost of investigating and monitoring in relation to that?
There's no metric that's collected at a national level about how much that actually costs. Yeah. And with every enforcement case that goes through the court system, there are pluses and minuses where the cost of taking that enforcement action is less than any fines imposed by the court, but there will be many instances where the cost does exceed the fine imposed by the court. So it is a little bit horses for courses depending on each case and circumstance.
And then my other question was, and this might be to do more with the rest of the council, where the attached report talks about how I guess a decision is escalated and actioned, from decision to make no formal enforcement action for a breach. And it was really interesting to see the different regional councils' approaches. And I was wondering if this is something that, as governors, as regulators, we should look at, whether our approach which one is best practice and where do we sit against that? I wasn't really able to tell from the table on page 138 whether we are, where it says in most instances there would be a discussion between the CME officer and a senior CME officer and or team leader. I was just throwing it out there. Is this something we need to look at where we index with the rest of our regional council whānau, and are we satisfied with that being our approach? That's all.
Yes, so I guess, Stephen, you can answer that from an officer's perspective. It might also, just a dimension of it, through annual reporting to us in relation to the regional sector, so we get a comparative analysis. My supplementary to that would be where areas of difference that we do it in a different way to everyone else and that raises an issue, will that come to us for consideration as for reviews or amendments to the CME policy that we have set as governors? So how do this reporting and that policy constantly improving relate?
Yeah, just one brief comment. Certainly, we look at the CME metrics report, and yes, like any council, we'll all be looking at ourselves in comparison to one another. And I think it is helpful to look at the differences, and some of them can remain differences. Some of them can be seen as, yes, no, this is good practice or best practice, we should adopt this. And one example is that indeed what we're endorsing today in terms of your agreement is an annual compliance summary, which is done throughout most of the regional sector, and you might see in the report we didn't have a tick on that. So there's one example where we have looked at the wider regional context and come and thought, no, that's a good thing that we should do as well here at Greater Wellington. And likewise in reverse, there'll be other councils that will be looking at Greater Wellington practice and saying, yes, that's something that we can adopt in terms of consistency and best practice.
Just a further comment on that in terms of consistency of best practice. As a governance role, you do of course endorse our CME policy, and that has a lot of what's been mentioned in this report within it. So you are endorsing that at the governance level in terms of our approach, and especially that officer sign off, etc.
I guess what's good about this is it's finally giving us a bit of a sector, as governors, giving us a bit of a sector picture, because that CME policy that we approve, we don't really see it in relation to what else is happening around the country.
Everyone likes to be ranked against their peers and see how they fall out. I've got two questions, just in absence of seeing other hands. So one relates to these agreements, if we vote for them, if we agree to them in this report, and the series of ways in which you officers will report to us as governors on regulation. Will that be added to the compliance monitoring and enforcement policy? Does that become a section of the policy that says how you report to governance, or will it just sit in this paper and we'll just be reminded of it every year because you bring us the annual report? Could that actually form an amendment to the CME policy?
Yes, it can form an amendment, and the policy does allow for changes, any certainly minor changes. This would be a minor change we can update without necessarily coming back to the committee. So the changes in practice can be reflected in updated minor amendments to the policy like this, yes.
So I'd see some value in that because our CME policy is a public-facing document. It's on our website. It is the way the members of the public, residents and ratepayers see how we as governors and as an institution operate that process. Having that include how you report to us to make sure that we have oversight of that, I think is something the public would want to know. My second question relates to one of the points of difference that comes through in the comparative analysis is the level of FTE resourcing we have in the CME area relative to other councils. So for the size of the Wellington region economy, our level of staffing for this area is very low. I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, do you think you need more friends in your team? Because but if it was identified that comparatively we seem to be under-resourced for providing this area and we were coming under workflow pressure around that, is that something you would proactively bring to us in a long-term plan type context for this is the financial resourcing situation with CME and we're unable to do what we'd like to do because of the lack of it? Yeah, Nigel's got a smile on, so I've obviously hit a button here. You get my question. Thank you for the CE.
I think the team are going to usefully defer that to me. Look, the short answer is our level of resourcing has always been a bit under other councils, and that's probably a workshop in itself as to why that is. But I think if the way in which we monitor, which is in some ways a little different than other areas, because it goes to the number of consents you have, it goes to your consenting framework as to how you monitor permitted activities, how you rank consenting in terms of risk, and therefore where you put your resource. And as some of the team said, no two regions are exactly the same. But if we felt that we could not effectively carry out our monitoring and compliance functions with the resource that we have, we would absolutely be coming to the council through an annual plan or a long-term plan process, identifying why we thought that, what the gaps were, as to why we thought that, then we'd be talking with the council about how we would plug those gaps through additional resourcing.
Can I just add to that we've actually done that through this committee as well. So through the triple F process, with the report identified we were on the lower side, and we did get additional resource because our compliance program was being impacted. So we did come back to this.
Was that a few years ago?
Sorry?
Was that a few years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Very good. I don't have any further questions. I haven't seen any other hands, so I think we'll have to. This is a decision paper, so we'll go back to the beginning of the paper. Quentin, push the right button. And the recommendation is that this committee agrees that the current level of environmental regulation reporting be maintained, which are those things listed, and then also agrees that an annual summary report of Greater Wellington's compliance and enforcement activity be prepared and accompany any future reporting of the National Metrics report to us as a committee. So Councillor Connolly will move that. Councillor Free will second that. Would either of you like to speak in debate? Would anyone else like to speak in debate? So I will simply put the motion. All those in favour of those recommendations say aye. Against? Very good. Carried. Thank you. That is our decision paper for today's meeting. So we've got through that hurdle. Well done. Lunch is probably gnawing away at your stomachs. So let's move on. We've only got a few items left, and they are all information items. However, there will no doubt be questions. So moving on to item 9, which is the Whaitua Implementation Programme Progress Report, which was deferred, I think, from the previous meeting. This has been a 6-monthly report because we've invested a lot in our Whaitua processes. Previous committees have asked staff to regularly report in on how we're going with recommendations, and so this is our next iteration of that report. Over to Nicola and
Josh.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou. I'm Nicola Patrick, the Director of Catchment, and
Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou. Ko Josh Ruddock aho. I'm the Whaitua Implementation Advisor in the Catchment team.
So Josh is the hard worker in the background pulling all the information together. Just a couple of brief comments. We'll take the paper as read, but we wanted to take this opportunity to share a few slides because the Whaitua process that Greater Wellington has been involved with for, it must be at least 13 years now, has been very significant. It has a really awesome history, and it has been talked about a lot across communities, and was developed in partnership with mana whenua and community representation, including TAs. So we did want to, we'll whip through the slides because we know that you're on a timetable. The other thing I just want to flag, and it's partly just to get your feedback at the conclusion as well, is this report has been delayed. It is a report up to November, so we're already in March, so the content is a bit out of date. We're due to report again in June, and we're really happy to receive your feedback on whether you would rather skip June and go to a 12-monthly report, which would be November, December, or stick with our current plans, which would bring you a similar thing in about 6 months' time. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is we have treated this paper as a for information paper because it's just updating you on what we've done. However, we're also happy to bring it as a for decision paper that actually seeks your guidance on, are we providing you the right amount of information and direction. Are you happy with the level of implementation happening? So today's for information, but we'll welcome your feedback otherwise. So we have a few slides, and like I said, I'll get through them a bit faster than we would have otherwise. So, and it's been really helpful having the build-up of papers today. So we've talked quite a lot about the RMA framing and national policy statements. This approach in the Whaitua space is in response to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. And it requires regional councils to set these water quality targets. And we have chosen to structure ourselves around what we call 5 Whaitua or 5 super catchments. They align largely with TA boundaries or combined TA boundaries, but also in the way that natural catchments work. As I said, they've been very much community-led processes with mana whenua and council representations. Quentin's seeing whether he can see himself in this particular photo. He's got the hat on. And it's been a process of using a broad range of diverse knowledge bases, from traditional Western science to mātauranga to local observations, to bring together information. Do you want to speak?
We've just wanted to show the work that's been put into the Whaitua implementation program so far. So these are the 6 documents that have been created up to date. And then we've included a little more information delving into the process that created these documents in the 4 Whaitua super catchments that Nicola highlighted earlier.
Yeah, our outstanding one is the Wairarapa Coast, and we're already starting on that journey, but again, learning from the past and trying to do it in a more integrated catchment planning way, where we are looking at the MPSFM requirements and looking at wider catchment needs to bring that together in a different style to previous ones. And I'll just skip over this really, because it's sort of stating the obvious with a little bit more detail. And as I've sort of said, in particular, the partnership with mana whenua has been really strong in the past in how we're doing these things, and that's been different in different places. In a couple of places, mana whenua chose to produce parallel documents because the combined document wasn't capturing the voice in the right way. With the most recent one, the Kapiti one, we worked in an explicit Tiriti House model, and we're able to produce a single combined document, I think in part to that model being really held up, not without challenges, but really honoured. What we've been trying to do over the last few years is move from a model of reporting on a document that was produced at a point in time with lots and lots of detailed recommendations to a more outcomes-based storytelling way of showing what we're doing, while not fully letting go of the transparency and connection to the recommendations, because of the way it's developed. Lots of community members, mana whenua members, and in fact, current and former councillors have a lot of care for those specific recommendations as well. And we didn't want to look like we were glossing over things. But what it means is you get quite a detailed report. We're trying to do a bit of both. So we're also looking for your guidance on whether we've moved to a new stage and you want something a bit slimmer. And that would mean we would just show evidence that we're keeping track of the detail, but we're not bringing you the detail. This is some of the detail. As you can see, we actually, if you discount Kapiti, which is relatively newly received, we're actually making some really good progress with implementation. Obviously, Kapiti is going to catch up as we bite into that more. And again, our next steps are continuing to do this, subject to your guidance about what level you want us to bring back to you, how often, As was said earlier in the meeting, there's been some real challenges in how you take set documents at a point in time and weave them into our resourcing system, but we're making progress on that. And I think that's our last slide.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Josh?
I was going to say that last thing you just said.
Sorry.
Go, beat me to it.
Thank you very much. I'd just add one thing, that's many of the recommendations from the FITRA program were regulatory in nature and therefore require a plan change to give effect to them. And of course, we are under the plan stop regime where we're not allowed to do that anymore. So the ones that got into some form before that point in time carry on or sit there. The ones that didn't cannot be actioned. So that's just a dimension of, and therefore there's perhaps more of an emphasis on the non-regulatory recommendations because that's where we have opportunity to do things. So moving to questions, we've got Councillor Free to start with.
Yeah, it's not quite so much a question, but I was horrendously disappointed with the Te Whanganui Atara Whaitua when it was set up, that it concentrated so much on the harbour and neglected to mention the coasts. And I don't know if there's any chance to kind of add to it, if it is a storytelling thing and it's evolving, because it's become quite obvious that there are issues with discharges to the coastal environment. And we've seen Moa Point, we've seen a Whero Bay stream, we've seen the Hawaii discharges, and the marine park that's been created around there. None of that is incorporated and encapsulated in the current description, which describes it as being the metropolitan Wellington area and surrounding hills draining into Te Whanganui Atara Harbour. But really, for Wellingtonians, there's a huge experience around the coast as well, and I feel like it's just been neglected. So feedback was given by Wellington City Council when that Whaitua was set up, but seemed to not be taken on board for whatever reason. But if it is an evolving thing, I think we need to expand the coverage and definition of that particular Whaitua.
Thank you. I'm going to take that question, Councillor Free. You have the joy of having 3 former Whaitua members sitting around the table here.
Yeah.
And Councillor Connolly Tupou and his Hatsi. No, were you community representative back then? Yes, and myself as a community representative. One of the scope constraints was that it was done under the guidance of the National Policy Statement of Freshwater Management, not the National Policy Statement for Coast or the Coastal Policy Statement. So it, in terms of the regulatory side, it had a scope constraint that was about freshwater, not saltwater, basically, albeit there's gaps in between. So, and I guess the other element is they are a point in time report.
Yeah.
They were agreed by a certain group of people at a point in time with mana whenua and with TAs at that point in time. It is not really for Greater Wellington to go and add things to them of its own accord. So I think that's the way it is. How we respond to the coastal context is another question, and our regional policy statement has elements around the coast.
Can I just say, though, that, for example, we have a Wairarapa coast Whaitua, and also some of the other Whaitua, like, for example, Rumahanga, talks about draining into Lake Wairarapa and Palliser Bay. So I don't know that I can quite see why that's a limitation.
I think it's a terminology thing. So it's about defining the catchment, but it's about the fresh water in that catchment, not so much.
There is fresh water draining into the coast.
So the Wairarapa Coast Whaitua will be concentrated on the streams and rivers in the geographical area that does not flow into the Rumahanga River. It flows to the Wairarapa Coast. It will not be looking at Pawa and salty bits of the Wairarapa Coast. So it's simply defining the geographical.
I don't think that's entirely logical, because you have a Whero Bay stream, the piped island-based stream, and other streams.
All of those streams were part of the Te Whanganui Atara.
But they don't, they're not covered in the description. Neither is the Makara stream, the Karori stream, which drains to the south coast.
So let's take that offline and we can,
I just didn't understand. I still don't understand, and I'm afraid that your explanation isn't gelling with mine.
Okay, Leanne's going to try and help me.
Thank you, Councillor Free. Yes, we agree that the scope, unfortunately, because it was our response to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, it included freshwater rivers, streams, and estuaries. But coast wasn't in the scope, so that wasn't part of our response. Some of the Whaitua wanted to talk about those areas, and so the scope creeped slightly. But our response to the Whaitua, it was a great process. It produced amazing recommendations. And our response to that as an organisation has been, how do we take that approach and widen it and integrate it more with all of our work, not just freshwater, but freshwater, marine, and sort of coastal areas as part of our response now and how we do catchment planning. And so through the triennial, we'll be able to bring you more work in terms of our response to how we manage the inputs into the coast, what our wider plans are, how that's reflected in our regional policy statement, but also how it reflects on our catchment planning and the information we'll bring to you through the LTP. So it doesn't mean that that work isn't being done or forgotten, it just wasn't part of the scope of that particular process.
Good, thank you. Any further Councillor Rhodes?
Just a quick one. In the list of attachments, there's nothing but Porirua in there. Is that a deliberate kind of, yeah?
Yes, it's because the Porirua Harbour Accord is taking in all the WIP recommendations and producing them in a different format. So instead of replicating them, we are going to bring you a paper on the Porirua Harbour Accord timed tentatively for June.
Thank you. So just returning to your question about the reporting to this committee, my suggestion would actually be, in terms of a very detailed report about recommendations and all of them, annually would be sufficient. And maybe if you bring us highlights of things that have changed or are significant in between times through the activity report. However, I'd just like to check that with committee members that we could just do a straw poll on that in case there's any objection. No objection to that. I don't think we need to pass a resolution for that. I think we'll just leave that with you. But the demand for a 6-monthly report was back in the day when councillors around this committee felt like there wasn't anything going on and we needed you to tell us more often that there was. And now I think we really want to be our attention drawn to the highlights and what's changing rather than the full breadth of comprehensive recommendations. However, Councillor Makarini is going to disagree with me. Go for it.
I'd never disagree, not completely. No, I just had a question on that, being a newbie. Because you're gathering the data and you're going to have the information and the detail, I'm assuming that if there's something that we're like, oh, we want to look into that a bit more, there'd be a process where that would be readily available for us.
Yeah, 100%. We'd welcome any councillor requests on any particular recommendation at any time. You don't need to wait till we bring you a report. Yeah.
That's a good point. Officers are very good at responding to such ideas. Thank you very much. Let's appreciate it, Nicola and Joshua. Let's move to item 10, Gollins Valley update. I think we have David Boone, if he hasn't gone for lunch. No, here he comes. So again, this is an information paper, an update on where council is at with Gollins Valley. Some of you went on a field trip recently. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there, but that might have prompted some questions. But Dave, would you like to introduce the paper first?
A very short introduction and helping you with time management. No presentation. Taking the paper as read, so happy to move straight to questions.
Councillor Connolly.
I don't feel like this paper takes us very far forward from the last paper we had. In fact, well, maybe I read it it was deferred. Maybe I've just read it a couple of times.
It's the same paper.
Okay, but right. So nothing's happened in the 6 weeks. But I guess I am keen. So it lays out various options, and obviously with my water hat on, I'm particularly interested in looking at the wastewater viability along with Te Aki Wai and Wellington Water. But I guess so it lays out options, but how and when are we actually going to be digging into those options?
We will have to report back to you on that. This paper is alluding to the primary decision-making process of what we do with this land. We're trying to paint the picture that it's wide open. When that primary planning and decision-making process occurs is dependent on establishing a working group with Mana Whenua and getting the forum up and running, which has happened at an operational level. We're partnering very well with day-to-day decision making at Golan's Valley, but the future planning, and how we're going to navigate that in partnership hasn't been stood up yet in terms of a forum to work with Mana Whenua through that. So I can't answer the question of what a time frame looks like just yet.
So would we be able to have a future paper maybe to June?
Absolutely.
That actually did outline, the plan for how we're going to determine the future uses of this and the role that Mana Whenua will have. I guess I'm just really keen to try to lock in. This is something that could sit there for a long time, and I guess I'm really keen to lock in some kind of pathway forward, especially as it sits outside the Parks Network Plan. Well, we might have not decided that it would be a park. So yeah, if we could bring back more of a timeline and we can lock in how we're going to address this problem, that would be useful.
Will do.
Thank you, Councillor Connolly. I'm also keen on that, so we'll make something roll along there. We have a bit of a Councillor Elders, Councillor Staples and Councillor Soares on this at the moment.
Yeah, just two quick questions for me. What's it currently costing in terms of debt interest for the purchase of Golan's Valley, and what are the OPEX costs maintaining it while decision processes work through?
I'll follow that up. I don't want to give you a false number, so I'll get back to you.
But for the meeting's sake, is it what was anticipated in the original purchase paper that council signed off almost a year ago that laid out a ballpark of what the OPEX would be to service the debt and to
Yes. The information that was in the recommendation to approve putting a tender on the property that hasn't changed. So we're servicing $8 million worth of debt, and we're relying on mostly parks OPEX to service other day-to-day management responsibilities, and I'll give you the numbers on that. It's definitely within the ballpark that we presented last year.
Thank you, Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question follows on from the discussion about the plan forward. When I went out to visit, it struck me that we have buildings out there that are sitting, and when buildings are sitting empty and not being used, they deteriorate. Certainly the farm as a farm is in very poor condition now with regards to pasture, and I appreciate that probably the vision is not to run it as a farm. Well, not probably, the vision will be not running it as a farm, but if we'd had a dry summer, we would be up the creek without a paddle with regards to that long dry grass out there. And to try and bring that pasture back to some form of manageable level for safety is going to be difficult the longer that we leave it. And I'm concerned that we've left it 9 months with no plan. It needs cattle. Getting cattle out there is going to be a hell of an expense. So my question is around we can't afford to sit and wait while we do a big planning process. We need to have some form of short-term plan to keep that property safe and keep those buildings in reasonable condition. So when can we expect to see that short to medium, please?
We're not sitting and waiting. I can provide an update after this meeting in regards to all those questions, Councillor Staples. Grazing license is in the works. Having conversations with respondents to an expression of interest process. We've been putting all of our eggs in the Belmont grazing basket at the moment in terms of staff capacity. And in regards to tenancy for the 2 cottages, we're currently in negotiations and planning on one of the 2 houses being used as part of a remuneration package for a Kaitiaki Ranger position that we're supporting with Taranaki Whanui. And we're looking to get tenants in the other larger house ASAP. And the past few months, we've had to spend a little bit on upgrading both of those dwellings to get them to healthy homes and water supply standard requirements.
Councillor Saw.
Thank you for this. I've sort of gone back to paragraph 17 where it's outlined sort of what the interim actions are. So thank you for that. But I think one other part which kind of builds on what my colleagues have spoken about and what the subsequent paragraphs outline is that I think another important interim action to take is updating our community on what we're doing and being really clear and intentional about what that is. So I would hope that there's some work on that to, I guess, manage expectations from the public. Even though we have got some actions, I think it's important to be able to signal what we are doing in a way that gives the community confidence that what they may see as nothing is happening there are actually things happening. So I'd hope that the chair of the committee and whoever else would be have some oversight over what that communication would look like.
Dave, could you respond to what?
Yes, I'll take that. I'll give you a very, very short snippet of what we're doing with community engagement, and happy to fold that into a future update. The opportunities for open public access are very limited in terms of opening the gate and saying, come on in. However, we're looking at monitoring and investigation opportunities. That we will get to a point in a planning exercise where we need information and data-based decisions, values-based decisions. So we're looking at opportunities to point volunteers in the right direction to help us with that monitoring and values identification mahi. That's a work in progress. It's getting to the point where we can start pointing volunteers in the right direction. Similar ideas with pest control, and we're thinking about creating limited access opportunities. At this stage, it's still in an ideas form, but I think we'll probably head in this direction of some form of a trip leader type training arrangement. Yep, exactly like Akatarawa Four-Wheel Drive Club, where we train trip leaders that can take others in with them to manage access. So that's the intent for allowing small groups of volunteers to get in and help us with the mahi to manage the place at the time being. And just real quickly in regards to open public access and managing expectations, we've been consistent in the messages that that's years away. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just saying that there are going to be limited opportunities. I think it's really important to be proactive about it rather than like not at the point of invitation that it's happening, but saying this is what's coming up. I think it's really important to be proactive in this particular project.
Indeed, and we are, and we'll come back to with information on that.
One question from me: as we move beyond the sort of interim land management into a proactive planning phase, we will need resource for that, and a lot of our parks planning and other planning resources are occupied, master planning processes and so on. Is resourcing the planning process here part of what is coming to us in the long-term plan? Because that would be our 3-year window nothing's going to happen if we don't put it in the long-term plan. We'll be sitting here in 4 years' time having the same conversation. So is there something built into our long-term plan discussions that will enable this planning to happen?
Yes.
It's too short an answer. I want a longer one, please. I like short answers, especially this close to lunch. Thank you very much. Any other last chance on Gollins? No more questions. So let's move. Thank you very much, Dave. Let's move to the final paper, which is the Tōpūtaiao Environment Group activity update, which comes to every meeting and gives us a bit of a flavour of what's going on. So over to Leanne.
Yes, thank you. Happy to take it as read and happy to take any questions. We have directors and managers available.
Councillor Connolly first, I think.
My question is around the fast track consenting and particularly the Belmont Quarry development. We have had discussions on Belmont Quarry before the application was actually lodged. I'm wondering whether it would be timely, potentially, for the next meeting to have a further update.
Welcome back to the table, Dave. So where are things at that one first, and then is there value in having a focused conversation on it at some point?
The process is well underway with the Belmont Fast Track Quarry. I can't give you a detailed update in terms of where the Fast Track application process is. We can follow up on that. Our involvement in it has been to collate all the information we hold on the land swap proposal. So that includes information on the dock give land and the dock get land. We have provided all of that information up front, and we've been clear with DOC that it is not our role to be the decision maker on this. This is a Department of Conservation role. So our position has been, here's the information. Let us know if you have any questions. But we have no opinion on whether the land exchange should be approved or not.
I don't know that that was entirely consistent with the discussion we had at previous council forums. Whilst it's entirely appropriate that officers just do their officering thing, we thought that there might be a level of political involvement, which is why I was asking, do we need to bring this back and have a further conversation about where we're at in a strategy in terms of how we approach it? Potentially not a question for Dave, for the chair.
Yeah, so my understanding was that we as council were happy for that to be a delegated authority, and we delegated the authority on it. And I can't remember a suggestion that it would come back to a governance forum to guide our comment. However, I guess there are two parts to this particular fast track application. One is the land exchange, which concerns parkland and other land being swapped for each other. And then there would be a second application that concerns all the other suite of consents and so on that Greater Wellington would then have another opportunity to provide comment on. That could be elevated to a governance discussion, at least as input through a workshop type forum, even if it was still a delegated authority with the CE. Is that?
So I thought, I mean, when I recall hearing from it last, there was no application on the table, and we were even uncertain as to exactly what bits of land we were talking about, and they will have changed since we've had discussions. But I thought we had reserved our right to, in a political sense, to kind of provide advocacy. We hadn't settled on that, but other councillors around the table are nodding that we'd heard from various people in regards to their concerns, and that we hadn't bottomed that out yet.
Okay. I think we'll have to get some advice on that, as the term chairs are meant to use when they don't know what to say next. I guess in terms of the statutory process, the land exchange application was lodged in December. I think comments have formally been requested and received, and that deadline has passed, and those who commented are now being considered by the department in its land exchange. So there's a point at which that window may have already closed. However, what we do from here on is, and we will actually, I think, under the law, be asked for comment on the draft decision, which does give us, Greater Wellington, another opportunity to provide comment. So we'll regroup on whether there could be a governance discussion to feed into what that comment could be. Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Any other questions on the activity report? There must be, but everyone's exhausted and really wants lunch. I must admit I have quite a few, but I'm not going to ask them because it's useful for committee members to remember that even if you don't get to ask your question on things, you can follow up through the portal or through the chair after a meeting. There's no question that can't be asked at any point. This is not the only opportunity. So I'll save mine for your sake for another day. I'm not seeing anything, so that brings us to the close of the meeting. And may I invite Councillor Tupou to karakia whakamatunga.
Unuhia ki te uru tapanui ki o wātea ki a māma te ngākau te tinana te wairui te ara takatū. Kuia rā I rongo whakairi hia ki runga ki a tina. Haumie huie.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of the meeting. There's a workshop this afternoon. It was scheduled for 1. I presume we need a slightly longer lunch break than 10 minutes. So can we name a time, whoever's in charge of that, to commence the environment workshop? 1:15. We've got